My wife and I had been together for years, long enough for me to become accustomed to her various hobbies, even the more unusual ones. She had always had a fascination with things that most people might find a bit eccentric. Take her latest interest, Japanese rope art, or shibari. She spent hours reading about it, practicing knots, and even going to workshops. I wasn't into it, but I didn't interfere either. If it made her happy, so be it. My approach had always been practical. Everyone has their thing, and this was hers. I wasn't about to start tying myself up, but I also wasn't going to make a big deal out of it. One day, she came up with this idea of throwing a costume party. She was always one for themes and creativity, and this time it was going to be a school-themed party, like the high school get-togethers from our past. She was thrilled about it, running around the house, making notes, ordering decorations online. I have to say, the whole idea seemed a bit over the top for my taste. But, again, if this was what she wanted to do, I wasn't going to argue. She had that spark in her eye, the one she got when she was all in on a project. I figured, what's the harm? A bit of nostalgia never hurt anyone. She spent days planning, running errands, and trying to recreate the feel of those old teenage parties. I kept my distance from all the preparations, to be honest. It wasn't really my thing, never had been. But when she asked if I could help by picking up some supplies, I figured it was the least I could do. She handed me a list that felt longer than my arm, and I headed out to get the stuff. On my way out, I could hear her on the phone, chatting with someone, probably about the guest list. She was always the social one, making sure everything was just right for her friends. The store was a mess. It felt like everyone in town had decided to do their shopping that day, and I had to push my way through the aisles just to grab what we needed. Drinks, snacks, decorations, you name it. I loaded up the cart and tried not to think too hard about the expense. It wasn't like we threw parties every weekend, so I let it slide. Besides, she'd been working hard on this, and I wanted her to enjoy it. I may not have understood all her hobbies, but I knew how much it meant to her to put something like this together. It took me longer than I expected to get everything, mostly because of the crowds. By the time I got to the checkout, I was already tired of the whole idea. I just wanted to get home, unload everything, and maybe relax with a beer before the chaos began. I wasn't much for parties, especially not the kind where everyone dresses up and pretends they're teenagers again. But I'd promised her I'd be supportive, so I kept my thoughts to myself and focused on getting through the checkout line without losing my patience. On the way back, I couldn't help but think about how different we were in some ways. She loved the excitement, the creativity, the chance to do something out of the ordinary. I was more straightforward, more interested in keeping things simple and predictable. But I suppose that was part of what made us work as a couple. She brought the energy, and I brought the stability. At least, that's how I like to think of it. As long as she wasn't asking me to do anything too ridiculous, I was fine with letting her have her fun. When I finally got back home, I could already see the decorations from the driveway. She'd gone all out, streamers, lights, even a big banner across the porch. It looked like something out of a high school movie. I sighed, not out of annoyance, but more out of acceptance. This was going to be one of those nights. The kind where I just had to go along for the ride and hope it didn't get too crazy. I carried the bags inside, and she came rushing over, her face lighting up when she saw all the stuff I'd managed to get. She was excited, and I couldn't help but smile a bit. At least one of us was looking forward to this. The house was a whirlwind of activity. She was putting up the last of the decorations, making sure everything was perfect. I put the bags down and watched for a moment. It was her element, she was in control, making things happen, and I was just there to support her. And that was fine by me. As long as she was happy, I could put up with a little bit of chaos. The day of the party came, but it wasn't quite what I expected. For some reason, the timing had changed. I thought it was supposed to be next weekend, but my wife had other plans. She'd rearranged everything, and before I knew it, our house was filled with people. Not just the friends and familiar faces I'd expected either, there were strangers everywhere. I didn't recognize half the people in our living room, and it made me uneasy. I stood there for a moment, scanning the crowd, wondering where all these new faces had come from and why nobody had bothered to tell me. The whole place had been transformed. Red plastic cups littered every surface, music blasted from the speakers, and there was a game of beer pong set up in the kitchen. It looked like a scene straight out of a college party, not something you'd expect from a bunch of grown adults. I couldn't help but shake my head at the sight. It wasn't really my idea of a good time, but I wasn't about to ruin it for my wife. She seemed to be having a great time, running around, making sure everyone had drinks, laughing with her friends. I tried to make the best of it, grabbed a beer, and found a spot to stand where I could keep an eye on things. I wasn't much of a social butterfly, and I certainly wasn't going to get involved in the beer pong or whatever else they had going on. I preferred to stay on the sidelines, watching, making sure everything was under control. But it was hard to ignore the chaos. People were getting louder, and it seemed like everyone was trying to outdo each other in terms of how drunk they could get. It was starting to get out of hand. At some point, I noticed a group of people getting particularly rowdy. They were gathered in the corner of the living room, shouting at each other, and it didn't look like friendly banter. One guy, I didn't know who he was swaying on his feet, his face flushed, and his voice getting louder with every word. Another guy, who I recognized as one of my wife's friends, was right in his face, clearly not backing down. It was obvious to me that this was about to turn into something more than just a heated argument. I put my beer down and made my way over to them. I wasn't about to let a fight break out in my house. Hey, let's calm it down, I said, stepping between them. I kept my voice firm but not aggressive. The last thing I wanted was to escalate things further. I put a hand on each of their shoulders, trying to separate them. The drunk guy stumbled back a bit, and I used the opportunity to get my wife's friend to step away. Take it easy, it's just a party, I said, trying to defuse the situation. My wife must have noticed what was happening because she came over just as I was trying to get things under control. She took the drunk guy by the arm and led him away, saying something to him that I couldn't quite hear over the music. She had a way of handling these kinds of situations, calm, collected, always knowing the right thing to say. I was glad she was there to help. I wasn't interested in playing babysitter all night, but I also wasn't going to let things spiral out of control. Eventually, the tension started to ease. The guy my wife had taken aside seemed to calm down, and she led him out to the backyard, away from the rest of the crowd. The music was still loud, people were still drinking, but at least the threat of a fight had passed. I went back to my spot by the wall, picking up my beer again and taking a long drink. This was exactly why I wasn't a fan of these kinds of parties: too many people, too much chaos, and too many chances for something to go wrong. After the party, I started noticing a change in my wife's behavior. She seemed glued to her phone more than usual, always texting or scrolling. It wasn't like her to be so absorbed in it, especially when we were supposed to be spending time together. I'd ask her something, and she'd take a moment before looking up, as if she hadn't heard me the first time. I wasn't the type to snoop or question every little thing, but it was hard not to notice how often her attention was somewhere else. One evening, I asked her who she was always talking to. She looked up from her phone, almost startled, like she hadn't realized I was watching. She smiled and said it was just a new friend she had met recently. Apparently, this friend was also into shibari, and they'd hit it off at one of the workshops. She told me the woman's name, and something about how they were sharing ideas and techniques. I nodded, not really interested in the details, but I could tell that it meant a lot to her. She mentioned that this friend was really passionate about the art and that they had been exchanging messages about different styles, knots, and events. To me, it sounded like more of the same, another hobbyist my wife had connected with. I wasn't particularly thrilled about it, but I didn't see any harm either. If it kept her happy and occupied, then who was I to argue? Everyone needed something to be passionate about, and for her, this was it. There were times when her phone would buzz late at night, and she'd pick it up immediately, her face lighting up as she read whatever message had come through. I couldn't help but feel a bit annoyed sometimes. It felt like this friend was getting more of her attention than I was. But I wasn't about to turn it into a big deal. I trusted my wife, and if she said it was just a friend, then that was that. I wasn't the kind of guy to pry or make accusations without reason. Still, it was hard to ignore completely. We'd be sitting on the couch, watching TV, and she'd be typing away, her eyes on the screen more than on the show we were supposed to be watching together. I'd make a comment about something happening on the show, and she'd just nod absent-mindedly, barely paying attention. It wasn't exactly the kind of quality time I had in mind, but I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't interested in starting an argument over something that seemed harmless. She even mentioned meeting up with this friend a couple of times, saying they were planning to practice together. I remember raising an eyebrow at that, but she just laughed it off, saying it was nothing serious, just two people sharing a common interest. I let it go. My wife had always been social, always liked meeting new people and learning from them. It was one of the things I admired about her, even if I didn't always understand it. I figured this was just another one of those times. It didn't take long for things to start feeling different around the house. My wife had started going out more often, and not just for a quick errand or a coffee with friends. She'd be gone for hours, usually in the evenings, and she'd come back late at night. The first time, I didn't think much of it. She said she was meeting up with her friend, the same one she'd been messaging all the time. She said they were practicing, and I just nodded, figuring it was part of her hobby. The second time, though, it started to feel a bit strange. She left again in the evening, dressed a little nicer than usual, and didn't come back until well past midnight. When she got home, she was upbeat, almost too cheerful. I asked her where she'd been, and she gave me the same story, practicing with her friend. I could tell she was trying to make it sound casual, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Still, I wasn't going to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who questioned every little thing. She'd come in, give me a kiss on the cheek, and tell me about how they'd tried some new techniques. I didn't really follow the details, but I nodded along, trying to show I was listening. It felt like her mind was always somewhere else, even when she was sitting right next to me. I asked her if everything was all right, and she laughed it off, saying I was just imagining things. I decided not to push it further. She mentioned meeting up with this friend more often, saying they were planning to practice together. I remember raising an eyebrow at that, but she just laughed it off, saying it was nothing serious, just two people sharing a common interest. I let it go. She'd always been social, always liked meeting new people, and I figured this was just another one of those times. One evening, she left without much explanation, dressed up more than I expected for a simple hobby session. I watched her leave, feeling a mix of confusion and unease. It wasn't like her to be so secretive, but I convinced myself that it was all in my head. She'd always been open with me, and I had no reason to doubt her now. That night, after she got back, we went to bed like we always did. She curled up next to me, her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her. She was asleep in minutes, her breathing slow and steady, but I lay there, wide awake. I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on. I wanted to trust her, to believe that everything was as simple as she made it seem, but the doubts were there, no matter how hard I tried to push them away. That night, I couldn't sleep. My wife had gone to bed easily, her breathing steady, while I lay there, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Something wasn't sitting right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than she was letting on. I tried to ignore it, to push the thoughts away, but the more I tried, the stronger the urge became. Eventually, I gave in. Quietly, I reached over to her side of the bed and picked up her phone. I knew it was a line I shouldn't cross, but I couldn't help myself. Unlocking her phone, I started scrolling through her messages. Most of them were the usual, family group chats, messages from friends. But then I found a conversation that stood out. It was with a man whose name I recognized from the party. I remembered seeing him that night, one of the strangers who had shown up and caused trouble. The messages were casual enough at first, but as I read further, it was clear that this was more than just a friendly chat. The way they talked, the things they said to each other, it wasn't right. My heart pounded as I read through the thread, a mix of anger and disbelief building inside me. I put the phone back, careful not to wake her, and lay there, staring at the ceiling once again. This time, though, my mind was racing. There was no denying it now. She was lying to me. The friend she'd been meeting, the one she'd been messaging constantly, it wasn't some innocent acquaintance. It was him. The guy from the party. The one I had already had a bad feeling about. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. I knew I couldn't let this slide. Something had to be done. The next morning, I confronted her. She was in the kitchen, making coffee, when I walked in. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told her I had seen her messages, that I knew she had been talking to that guy. She looked at me, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, she didn't say anything, and then her expression shifted. She was angry. "You had no right to go through my phone," she snapped, her voice rising. I could feel my own anger bubbling up, but I kept my voice steady. I told her that it didn't matter, what mattered was that she had lied to me, that she was talking to someone she shouldn't be. She tried to defend herself, saying it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But I wasn't having it. I told her, plain and simple, that I wanted her to cut off all contact with him. No more messages, no more meetups, nothing. She glared at me, her face flushed with anger, but she didn't argue. She just turned away, muttering under her breath. I knew she was furious, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to let some guy come between us, to let her lie to me and think it was okay. After she left the room, I picked up my phone and found the guy's number. I didn't hesitate. I called him, and when he answered, I didn't bother with introductions. I told him exactly who I was and what I thought of him. I made it clear that if he ever came near my wife again, there would be consequences. Physical consequences. I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses or explanations. I just wanted him to know that I wasn't playing games. He tried to say something, but I cut him off and ended the call. I wasn't going to waste any more time on him. When my wife found out that I had called him, she was livid. She said I had gone too far, that I had no right to threaten him like that. I could see the hurt in her eyes, but I stood my ground. I told her that I did what I had to do, that I wasn't going to let her make a fool out of me. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I could hear her crying in the other room, but I didn't follow her. I wasn't going to apologize for protecting what was mine. For the next few days, things were tense between us. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was short and clipped. But I noticed that she wasn't messaging him anymore. She had deleted the conversation, and whenever her phone buzzed, it wasn't him. She made a point of showing me that she was done with him, that she was cutting ties. I could tell she was still angry, still hurt by what I had done, but at least she was making an effort. And that was enough for now. Work had been hell all week. Problems kept piling up, and I found myself staying late every night, trying to sort things out. Deadlines, paperwork, endless meetings, it was all wearing me down. I hadn't had time to think about much else, let alone focus on what was happening at home. My wife and I were still on shaky ground after what had happened with the messages, but I had hoped that with a little time, things might settle down. I was too exhausted to argue, too tired to think about anything beyond the next day. On one of those nights, I managed to get out of the office earlier than usual. It felt like a small victory, and all I wanted to do was get home, take a shower, and maybe have a quiet dinner. I drove back, the traffic lighter than I expected, and pulled into the driveway. The house was dark, which struck me as odd. Usually, there'd be lights on, the TV flickering in the living room, some sign of life. I shrugged it off, figuring maybe she was out or just in bed early. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the quietness of the house unsettling. As I walked down the hallway, I heard something, a noise coming from the back room, the one we hardly used. It was faint, almost like muffled voices or movement. My first thought was that she was watching something on her phone, but something about it didn't feel right. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a dim light coming through the crack. My gut twisted. I pushed the door open, not knowing what I was about to find, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. There she was, my wife, tied up, hanging upside down, completely naked. And right next to her, just as naked, was that bastard. The one I had warned her about. The one I had told her to stay away from. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. My mind went blank, my vision narrowing on the two of them. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't even think. I just moved, driven by pure rage, by the betrayal that was right in front of me. I lunged at him, grabbing him by the arm and yanking him away from her. He barely had time to react before my fist connected with his face. He stumbled back, crashing into the wall, and I didn't stop. I hit him again, the rage pouring out of me with every punch. He tried to shield himself, tried to say something, but I didn't care. I wasn't listening. All I could see was red. The thought of him in my house, with my wife, doing this, it was more than I could handle. I wanted to make him pay, to make him regret ever setting foot in my home. He tried to fight back, but he was no match for me. I had years of anger, years of frustration built up, and it all came out in that moment. I could hear my wife screaming, telling me to stop, but her voice was distant, barely registering in my mind. I grabbed him by the neck, dragging him towards the door, my hand shaking with the force of my anger. He was bleeding, his face bruised, but I didn't care. He deserved every bit of it. He had no right to be here, no right to touch her, no right to invade my life like this. I dragged him through the hallway, his feet stumbling over themselves as he tried to keep up. He was pleading now, his voice cracking, but I wasn't listening. I was done with him. I wanted him out of my house, out of my life. I reached the front door, yanking it open, and shoved him outside. He stumbled, nearly falling, and I stood there, my chest heaving, my fists still clenched. "If I ever see you again," I growled, my voice low and filled with venom, "I swear to God, I'll kill you." He didn't say anything. He just turned and ran, his bare feet slapping against the pavement as he disappeared into the night. I stood there for a moment, watching him go, my hand still trembling. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the empty house. I turned back, my eyes falling on the mess that was left behind. My wife was still there, still tied up, her eyes wide with fear. But I didn't care. Not right then. All I cared about was getting that bastard out of my house. And I had done that. I had thrown him out, and he wasn't coming back. She was still there, hanging upside down, her eyes wide with shock and fear. She started screaming at me, her voice frantic, but I didn't hear a word she said. All I could think about was how she had betrayed me, how she had lied to my face over and over again. I walked past her, ignoring her cries, and headed straight to the bedroom. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started throwing her clothes into it, my hands moving quickly, mechanically. I wasn't thinking about what I was doing, I just wanted her gone. The more I packed, the louder her screams became. She was yelling at me, calling my name, begging me to untie her, to talk to her. But I wasn't interested in talking. There was nothing left to say. I had seen everything I needed to see. I had given her a chance, and she had thrown it away. I zipped up the suitcase, my movement sharp and angry, and carried it back to where she was still hanging. She looked at me, her face streaked with tears, her voice breaking as she pleaded with me. But I had no sympathy left. I dropped the suitcase at her feet, my expression cold, and reached up to untie her. She fell to the floor, landing in a heap, and I stepped back, watching as she struggled to get up. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for some sign of forgiveness, some sign that I might change my mind. But there was nothing there. I was done. I pointed to the suitcase, my voice flat as I told her to take her things and leave. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes widening in disbelief, but then she realized I wasn't joking. She tried to argue, tried to tell me that it wasn't what it looked like, that she could explain. But I wasn't interested in her explanations. I had heard enough lies, seen enough betrayal. I told her again, more forcefully this time, to take her things and get out. She looked at me, her face crumpling, and then she reached for the suitcase, her hands trembling. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and started to walk towards the door. I followed her, my eyes never leaving her, making sure she understood that this was final. She stopped at the door, turning to look at me one last time, her eyes filled with tears. She tried to say something, her voice barely a whisper, but I cut her off. I told her that I was filing for divorce, that I was done with her, that there was no coming back from this. She looked at me, her face pale, and then she turned and walked out, the door closing behind her with a hollow thud. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, my chest tight, but I didn't feel any regret. Just a cold, empty sense of finality. Once she was gone, I turned and walked back through the house, taking in the mess that was left behind. The rope, the overturned furniture, the shattered pieces of what was once our life together. I felt a strange sense of calm as I began to clean up, my movement slow and deliberate. I picked up the rope, coiling it neatly, and put it away. I righted the furniture, wiped down the surfaces. It was like I was erasing her presence from the house, taking back what was mine. It felt right. It felt necessary. The next day, I went to see a lawyer. I told him I wanted a divorce, that I wanted it done quickly, cleanly, with no chance of reconciliation. He nodded, taking notes, asking questions, but I barely heard him. My mind was elsewhere, already moving forward, already trying to figure out what my life would look like without her. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, there would be judgment, but I didn't care. I was ready to be done with it all, ready to move on. By the time I got home, the house was quiet, empty. I sat down on the couch, staring at the wall, the silence settling around me like a heavy blanket. It was over. The relationship, the lies, the betrayal, all of it was done. I didn't feel relief, not exactly. Just a sense that it was time to start over, to put everything behind me and move forward. And that was exactly what I intended to do. After the divorce, I felt like I needed something to clear the air, something to mark a new beginning. The house had been too quiet for too long, filled with the echoes of what had happened. I decided to throw a small party for a few close friends. Nothing big, just a gathering of people I trusted, people who had stuck by me during the worst of it. I wanted to put the past behind me, to fill the house with laughter and conversation again, to remind myself that life could still be good. I spent the day getting things ready. It wasn't anything fancy, just some drinks, a few snacks, and some music. I wanted it to be simple, easy, something that wouldn't remind me of all the chaos that had come before. By the time my friends started arriving, I felt a sense of relief. The house felt alive again, the way it used to before everything had gone wrong. People were smiling, talking, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The evening was going well. We were all gathered in the living room, drinks in hand, the music playing softly in the background. There was a warmth in the air, a sense of normalcy that I had been craving. I was talking with one of my friends, laughing at some story he was telling, when I heard the knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone else, but I figured it was probably just a neighbor or someone who had heard the music and wanted to see what was going on. I excused myself and went to answer it. When I opened the door, my stomach dropped. Standing there was my ex-wife, and right beside her was that bastard, the one I had thrown out of my house, the one who had ruined everything. Behind them was a small group of people I didn't recognize. My ex looked at me, her expression almost defiant, like she had every right to be there. I could feel the tension rising in my chest, the anger bubbling up again. I didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at them, trying to keep my composure. I stepped aside, letting them in, but I could feel my hands clenching into fists at my sides. They walked into the living room, and the mood shifted instantly. My friends fell silent, their eyes darting between me and the newcomers. I could see the confusion, the discomfort, and I knew I had to do something. I wasn't about to let them ruin this night for me, not again. I walked over to where they were standing, my voice low but firm as I addressed my ex-wife and her lover. "You've got two options," I said, my eyes locked on them. "You either turn around and leave right now, or things are going to get real ugly, real fast." I could see the shock on her face, the way her lover shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at the people watching. I wasn't bluffing, and they could tell. I'd had enough of their games, enough of their disrespect. This was my home, my life, and I wasn't about to let them invade it again. My ex started to say something, her voice shaking, but I cut her off. "I'm serious," I said, my voice cold. "You need to leave. Now." I could feel the room holding its breath, everyone waiting to see what would happen. Her lover looked at me, his eyes narrowing, like he was trying to decide if I was serious. I reached behind me, my hand resting on the drawer where I kept the gun. I didn't want to use it, but I was ready to if I had to. I wasn't going to let them take anything else from me. The tension in the room was thick, the silence almost unbearable. I had given them an ultimatum, but it seemed like they were still deciding whether to take me seriously. My ex-wife's lover stood there, his eyes locked on mine, and I could see the challenge in his gaze. He wasn't backing down, and it infuriated me. I didn't want trouble, but I also wasn't going to let them ruin what I was trying to build here. The weight of the situation pressed on me, and I could feel the muscles in my jaw tightening. One of his friends, a big guy, bigger than me by a good margin, took a step forward. He was trying to be intimidating, trying to show that they weren't afraid of my threat. My heart started pounding, my pulse quickening as I watched him move closer. He took another step, and I could feel the air shift, the room holding its breath. My hand was still resting on the drawer where I kept the gun, and I could feel the cold metal just beneath my fingers. I wasn't a man who made empty threats. I had meant every word I said. I warned him to stop, my voice low and steady, but he didn't listen. He kept moving towards me, his posture aggressive, his eyes fixed on mine. I could hear my friends behind me, their nervous murmurs filling the silence, but I couldn't focus on them. All I could see was this man, this threat, coming at me. He took another step, and that was it. My instincts kicked in, the years of anger and betrayal boiling over in an instant. I pulled the gun from the drawer, my hand shaking just slightly, and pointed it at him. "Back off," I said, my voice coming out as more of a growl. He hesitated for a second, but then he took another step, and I knew he wasn't going to stop. I squeezed the trigger, the shot echoing through the room, louder than I had expected. Time seemed to slow down as I watched him stumble back, his hands flying to his stomach, his face contorting in pain. He fell to the floor, the others in the room frozen in shock. The music had stopped, the laughter and conversation replaced by stunned silence. My ex-wife screamed, her voice piercing through the quiet, and the rest of her group panicked. Her lover looked at me, his eyes wide with fear, and without another word, he turned and ran. The others followed, scrambling for the door, their footsteps pounding against the floor as they fled. I stood there, the gun still in my hand, my heart racing. I could hear the ragged breathing of the man on the floor, his moans of pain cutting through the stillness. I knew I had to act quickly. I put the gun down on the table, my hand shaking as I pulled out my phone. I dialed 911, my voice steady as I told the operator what had happened. I gave them my address, explained that there had been a shooting, that someone was injured. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like I was talking about something that had happened to someone else. But this was real. This was happening, and there was no going back now. I looked down at the man on the floor, his hand still pressed against his stomach, blood seeping through his fingers. My friends were standing off to the side, their faces pale, their eyes wide with shock. I could see the fear in their eyes, the confusion, the questions they were too afraid to ask. I didn't say anything to them. There was nothing to say. I had done what I had to do to protect myself, to protect my home. And now, all I could do was wait for the police to arrive. The minutes felt like hours as we waited, the tension in the room unbearable. The sound of sirens in the distance was both a relief and a reminder of what had just happened. The door was still open, the cool night air drifting in, and I stood there, staring at the scene in front of me, trying to make sense of it all. I had crossed a line, one I knew I could never uncross. But I had done it to protect myself, to defend what was mine. And now, I would have to face the consequences. The trial was one of the most grueling experiences of my life. I sat there in the courtroom, surrounded by strangers, the judge, the jury, the lawyers, all of them watching me, trying to decide whether I was a criminal or just a man pushed to his limits. My lawyer argued that it was self-defense, that I had been protecting my home, my friends, and myself. The prosecutor tried to paint me as a violent man, someone who had taken things too far. It was hard to sit there, listening to them talk about me like they knew who I was, like they understood what had happened that night. The witnesses were called, my friends taking the stand one by one. They spoke about how the man had come at me, how he had ignored my warnings, how I had done everything I could to avoid violence until there was no other choice. Their words were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this, that people had seen what had really happened. The prosecutor tried to twist their words, to make it seem like I had been looking for a fight, but my friends held their ground. They told the truth, and I could see the doubt in the jurors' eyes beginning to fade. My ex-wife was there too, sitting on the other side of the courtroom. She looked different, worn down, tired. She didn't testify, didn't say a word to me the entire time. I could see the anger in her eyes, but also something else, maybe regret, maybe fear. I wasn't sure, and honestly, I didn't care. She had made her choices, and now we were both paying the price for them. I kept my focus on the trial, on the facts, on what I had to do to get through this. When the jury finally delivered their verdict, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. They found me not guilty, agreeing that my actions had been in self-defense. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, the weight of the past few weeks suddenly lifting off my shoulders. The judge spoke, the gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. I was free. But it didn't feel like a victory, just an end to a nightmare I had never wanted to be part of in the first place. After the trial, I went home, the house feeling emptier than ever. The silence was almost deafening, but it was a relief too. No more chaos, no more uncertainty, just peace. I spent the next few days trying to get back to some kind of normal, trying to figure out what my life was supposed to look like now. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. A few weeks later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my ex-wife's lover had left her. Apparently, after everything that had happened, he had decided that it wasn't worth it. He had walked out, leaving her to deal with the aftermath on her own. I wasn't surprised. He had always struck me as the kind of guy who ran when things got tough, and this was no different. I felt a strange mix of emotions when I heard the news, anger, pity, maybe even a little satisfaction. She had made her choices, and now she was dealing with the consequences. I didn't reach out to her. There was nothing left to say. She had made her bed, and now she was lying in it. I had my own life to focus on, my own future to build. I wasn't interested in what she was going through, in whether she was happy or miserable. That part of my life was over, and I was ready to leave it behind. I had spent too long caught up in the drama, in the lies and betrayal. It was time to move on. In the end, the trial, the shooting, the betrayal, it all felt like a bad dream, something that had happened to someone else. I knew I would carry the scars of it all for the rest of my life, but I also knew that I had come out the other side stronger. I had faced my worst fears, had stood my ground, and had survived. And now, finally, I was ready to start over, to build a life that was mine, free from the shadows of the past. It wasn't long after the trial that my ex-wife started reaching out to me again. At first, it was subtle, a text message here, a call there. She would say she just wanted to check in, to see how I was doing, but I could read between the lines. She was looking for a way back in. I ignored her messages, letting my phone ring until it went to voicemail. There was nothing she could say that would change what had happened, nothing that would make me want to let her back into my life. Eventually, she started coming by the house. She would knock on the door, sometimes for minutes at a time, calling my name, asking me to just talk to her. I never answered. I would stand there, just out of sight, listening to her plead, her voice cracking as she begged me to give her another chance. But I couldn't do it. The betrayal was too deep, the scars too fresh. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it away. There was no going back from that. One day, she left a letter in my mailbox. It was long, pages and pages of apologies, of explanations, of promises that she would change, that things would be different if I just gave her one more chance. I read it once, then folded it back up and put it away. Her words didn't move me. They felt empty, like she was trying to rewrite the past, to make it seem like everything could be fixed with a few apologies. But I knew better. Some things couldn't be undone, and some wounds couldn't be healed. Around that time, I met someone new. Her name was Emily. We met through a friend at a small gathering, nothing like the chaotic parties of the past. She was different, calm, kind, with a warmth that I hadn't realized I needed. We started talking, and there was an ease to it, a simplicity that felt right. There were no games, no lies, just two people getting to know each other. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, to the time we spent together. It was like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that there was still good in the world. Emily knew about my past. I didn't hide it from her. I told her about the divorce, about the betrayal, about the trial. She listened without judgment, her eyes soft, her hand resting on mine as I spoke. She didn't try to offer solutions or tell me what I should have done differently. She just listened, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could let my guard down, like I didn't have to be on edge all the time. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I missed. My ex-wife kept trying to reach out, but I ignored her. I was done with that chapter of my life. I had spent too long caught up in the drama, in the lies and betrayal. I wasn't going to let her pull me back into that darkness. I had found something better, something real, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. Emily was a chance at a new beginning, a chance to build something healthy, something that wasn't tainted by the past. One day, my ex showed up at the house again. She stood on the porch, her eyes red from crying, and begged me to talk to her. I looked at her through the window, her figure blurred by the glass, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no desire to open the door. I turned away, walked back to where Emily was waiting in the kitchen, and wrapped my arms around her. My ex-wife's voice faded into the background, and all I could hear was Emily's laughter, soft and genuine. Moving on wasn't easy, and I knew there would always be scars. But I also knew that I deserved better, that I deserved happiness, peace, and someone who would stand by me without lies or betrayal. With Emily, I felt like I had a chance at that. A chance to start over, to leave the past behind, and to open a new chapter in my life. And that was exactly what I intended to do. It happened one morning as I was getting ready to head out. I walked up to my car, and there it was, a long, jagged scratch running along the side. It wasn't something small either, someone had put some real effort into it, making sure it couldn't be ignored. My heart sank at the sight of it, the anger bubbling up almost immediately. I knew, deep down, who was behind this. It had to be her. My ex-wife, the only person who had that kind of spite left in her. I decided to check the security cameras just to be sure. Later that day, I sat down and pulled up the footage from the cameras I had installed around the house. As I scrolled through the recordings, there she was. In the dead of night, she had crept up to my car, her face partially hidden, and taken something sharp to the paint. I watched, my jaw tightening as she scratched her way from one end of the car to the other, her movements almost methodical. It was clear that this wasn't just a random act, it was personal, a message to me that she wasn't done yet. I could feel my hand shaking with anger as I watched the footage. I could have called the police right then, reported the vandalism, and let them handle it. But as I sat there, watching her on the screen, I realized I wanted more than just a report. I wanted her to face the consequences of her actions, and I wanted her to know that I wasn't playing games anymore. I talked it over with Emily that evening, and she agreed. We would set her up, make her think she was getting what she wanted, and let her fall right into the trap she had set for herself. I picked up my phone and called my ex-wife. She answered almost immediately, her voice cautious at first, then hopeful as I told her I wanted to talk. I told her I had been thinking about things, that maybe we had been too hasty, that maybe there was still something worth saving between us. I could hear the excitement in her voice as she agreed to come over. She didn't even hesitate. She said she'd be there that evening, and I knew I had her exactly where I wanted her. When she arrived, I let her in, putting on my best act. I told her that Emily was out of the picture, that I had realized she was the one I wanted to be with. She ate it up, her eyes brightening, her smile widening as she stepped closer to me. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the need to believe that she was getting what she wanted. I played along, keeping my distance just enough to make it seem real, but not enough for her to get too comfortable. I wanted her to think she had won. Then came the knock at the door. I watched her face fall, confusion replacing the hope that had been there just moments before. I walked over and opened the door, letting the officers in. My ex-wife's expression shifted from confusion to panic as she saw them. She turned to me, her eyes wide, her voice trembling as she asked what was going on. I didn't say anything at first, I just picked up the remote and played the footage from the cameras, the screen showing her, clear as day, vandalizing my car. Her face went pale, and she started to protest, but the officers were already moving towards her. She screamed at me as they put her in handcuffs, calling me every name in the book, her voice filled with hatred and betrayal. She accused me of setting her up, of being a liar, of being a coward. I stood there, watching as they led her out of the house, her shouts fading as they took her away. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, a weight lifting off my shoulders. She had pushed too far, and now she was finally facing the consequences. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting myself, about making sure she understood that I wasn't someone she could walk all over. In the weeks that followed, she ended up paying for the damage to my car, the legal consequences enough to keep her away from me for good. Emily and I decided it was time for a fresh start, away from the memories, away from the drama that had haunted this house for too long. We found a new place, something smaller, something that felt like ours and not a reminder of everything that had happened. Moving in felt like closing a door on the past, like finally being free of the weight that had been holding me down for so long. As we settled into our new home, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The past was behind us, the chaos and pain left in the rearview mirror. Emily and I were building something new, something that was ours alone. And as I looked at her, smiling as she unpacked a box in the kitchen, I knew that I had made the right choice. It was time to move forward, to leave behind the anger, the betrayal, and to embrace the life that lay ahead of us.
I discovered my wife's cheating after finding something in her purse that unraveled the truth. My name is Sal, short for Salvatore, and I'm from Italy. My parents moved to the United Kingdom in the late 1960s. We had a popular Italian restaurant that not only supported my immediate family but also extended to distant relatives, including many cousins. Though we're not always in each other's pockets, we're a close-knit family. We make an effort to gather for family events to avoid our beloved grandmother's disapproving gaze. She's the matriarch of our clan. 7 years ago, Connie, who always insisted on obedience, became my wife. We both decided to marry around the age of 30 after being in a relationship without a clear direction. Although it was satisfying in some ways, it lacked the elements needed for a long-term commitment. For almost 2 years, we enjoyed each other's company, attended parties, and had a great time before deciding to exchange vows. Unfortunately, my grandmother never fully accepted Connie, maintaining a tolerant attitude towards her. She was never openly rude, but there was always a look of disbelief in her eyes, as if she expected Connie to make a mistake. Where women get such intuition is a mystery to me. My grandmother had a tough time hiding her emotions from my wife, even though she never expressed her opinions in front of others. Just before our marriage, my grandmother warned me to keep an eye on Connie, expressing concerns about something bothering her. These words continued to echo in my head for unknown reasons. About a month ago, I discovered that my wife was secretly dating another man. They met regularly for at least 6 months, and I found out after a thorough investigation. Surprisingly, finding the truth wasn't as difficult as I expected. One evening, a small oversight on her part raised suspicions. It all started with a minor detail: a pen. A cheap, ordinary pen usually given as a hotel souvenir. Its sudden appearance puzzled me, because I couldn't recall staying at the hotel from where she got it. I usually prefer well-known hotel chains about once a month, although I'm accumulating loyalty points. But they're not that great. One evening, while walking with Connie, I needed a pen. She rummaged in her big purse and pulled one out for me. However, after finishing writing, I noticed an inscription on the handle that caused a small alarm. I knew I hadn't stayed at the hotel indicated on the pen, leading to my confusion. Without saying a word, I handed the pen back to Connie. Although seemingly insignificant, this small crack in our marriage could lead to significant consequences. Strangely, I chose to push it aside as we were meeting friends for a delightful evening over dinner, drinks, and dancing. With 2 other couples, we found ourselves in the cozy lounge bar of our favorite restaurant, just when the infamous pen made its significant move. It was a place where we always felt comfortable and could enjoy a relaxed atmosphere. Additionally, the restaurant owner was one of my cousins, allowing us a generous family discount. We reciprocated by expressing our support for the establishment. The discounts helped us strike the perfect balance between gratitude and not undermining the owner's authority, a mutually beneficial arrangement that worked harmoniously. The other couples present that evening were Carlo and his wife, Joanna, as well as Phil and Terry. Carlo and Joanna were a bit older than us, about 5 years. Despite our distant relationship, we still considered ourselves a family. Carlo had somewhat old-fashioned behavior, and his life was quite interesting, although not entirely within the law. Despite his formidable personality, underneath the intimidating exterior was an incredibly kind and gentle person. You couldn't find a better person unless you managed to upset him. Just one piece of advice: don't. Carlo was like an older brother to me, always ready to support and be a reliable companion who knew how to keep me out of trouble. His wife, Joanna, was a charming woman who shared a deep love with Carlo, making them an ideal couple. She was not only beautiful but also the only person who could intimidate Carlo, although he openly adored her without any doubt. I was fortunate to get to know Phil through work, and we immediately found a common language. We were the same age and had similar views on life. Sometimes we played golf together, and our friendship went beyond the golf course. Phil's wife, Terry, joined us during chats at the golf club, and everything seemed to be going well. It was noticeable that Terry and Connie got along well. Often they spent days on excessive shopping trips, buying everything in a row and spending what felt like an eternity on it. All I saw were the huge bags that Connie brought home after such outings. While Phil was consistently warm and friendly, Terry sometimes seemed distant, especially lately. But there came a moment when she suddenly joined the team completely. I often suspected something was wrong with her and repeatedly told Connie about it. However, she brushed it off, resorting to the typical excuses about women's problems when a woman doesn't want to share something. While we were in a comfortable area enjoying cocktails, Carlo and Joanna entered. I stood up to warmly greet them with hugs and kisses. A prompt waiter quickly brought new drinks to our table. Connie was always amazed at how well we were treated wherever we went. Considering the 6 of us, my cousin efficiently directed us to our reserved table, our usual spot with both privacy and a view of the entrance. Carlo always preferred this window view, and although curious, we didn't ask why. Joanna inquired about Phil and Terry, mentioning she had talked to Connie earlier and knew they might be a bit late since Phil was not home yet. Observing the interaction between the 2 women, Carlo gave me a significant look. I met his gaze, but he subtly shook his head, choosing to leave things as they were. I mentally noted to discuss this with Carlo later. After finishing our first drinks, Phil and Terry finally arrived, looking a bit flushed. Carlo watched them with an unfathomable expression. I noticed the familiar look again and wondered what Carlo knew. Something important was definitely happening. As we settled into our seats, we quickly delved into discussions about work, upcoming plans, and the usual talk about our families and children. After a delightful meal, we returned to the lounge area with music playing. At this point, the girls were eager to hit the dance floor. The 3 of us guys sat for a while, realizing our duty was to accompany them. Carlo took the lead and escorted Joanna back to our table after the first song. Glancing around, I noticed Phil and Terry still on the dance floor, but there was an awkwardness between them. I quietly asked Connie if they were okay. She replied, "I think so." Terry didn't talk about anything. A second look at her made me realize something was definitely wrong. Phil and Terry joined us at the table, but Terry quickly excused herself, saying she needed to go to the restroom. Carlo casually asked Phil if everything was all right. Phil calmly replied, "Yes, it's fine, just maybe a little too much." He signaled to pour more, and the waiter brought a new round of drinks before the women returned. The nonverbal signs revealed true feelings. Connie's gaze conveyed anxiety, and Carlos subtly nudged me, hinting at hidden knowledge. He winked, confirming he knew something important. To ease the tension, we continued changing partners for a few more dances, but as we prepared to leave, I noticed Connie talking to Phil at the other end of the hall. This extra detail of the evening didn't escape my notice. I thought about asking her later, but changed my mind. After saying goodbye, we took separate taxis. Curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't resist asking about Phil and Terry the next day. "What happened to them?" I asked directly. She reassured me everything was fine, but as she looked out the window, I felt something was wrong. Not understanding what exactly was the matter, I decided to contact Carlo the next morning. That night, Connie tried to reassure me with closeness, reminding me of her love. However, an odd feeling persisted. Something was amiss, but I couldn't pinpoint it. "Darling, always remember that I love you too. You are my wife, and no one will ever separate us. I will never give you a reason to doubt it." Hugging her tightly, I showered her face with kisses, and we fell asleep. Yet the unusual events of that evening lingered in my mind. Realizing I needed to contact Carlo first thing in the morning, Connie went to the gym early the next day. Aimlessly wandering around, I drank refreshing orange juice, attempting to clear my clouded mind. Sitting at my laptop, I began searching for the hotel engraved on the pen handle in Connie's purse. After a thorough Google search, I discovered its location conveniently close, but on the other side of London. I noted down contact details, and my skepticism led me to study the hotel's history for potential clues. Unfortunately, my investigation yielded nothing significant. I was ready to leave. I called Carlo, expressing my concern about Phil and Terry. The unease in my voice must have been apparent as I asked, "What's up with Phil and Terry? Should I be worried?" Carlo suggested meeting at his brother's bar at noon to discuss it face-to-face, urging me to come alone. Assuring him, I agreed, and the call ended, leaving me with a growing sense of anxiety. As the day unfolded, I shared my plans with Connie, assuring her it wouldn't take long. Her curiosity led her to inquire, "What does he want to say?" The concern in her eyes mirrored the growing unease I felt. A sense of foreboding accompanied me as I drove to Carlo's house. Carlo greeted me and, without words, gestured for me to follow him. We navigated through the bar, entering utility rooms until we reached a secluded, office-like space. As we sat on opposite sides of a large oak table, Carlo's solemnity was palpable. He began, "I promised your father I'd always protect you, and I intend to keep that promise, but what I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear." The pain in his eyes heightened my apprehension, and my thoughts raced, anticipating the revelation's gravity. Carlo handed me a large manila envelope, emphasizing the weight of the moment, Remember, I'm here for you, okay? The deliberate movements and the suffering in his gaze hinted at the seriousness of what lay inside. Opening the envelope, glossy photos unfolded, revealing my wife in different poses with another man in a shabby hotel room. Shocked, I could hardly process the sight before me. Carlo's voice broke through my awareness haze as my marriage unraveled before my eyes. Tears streamed down my face and I locked eyes with Carlo, desperate for answers. How? When? Who is he? The torrent of emotions, shock, fear, and anger swirled within me as I clung to Carlo's promise of support in the midst of this unexpected storm. Carlo stammered, his voice trembling as he informed me about Connie's suspicious actions. He had heard rumors a few weeks ago but only gathered concrete evidence recently. Before our recent date, he discovered some unsettling details. According to him, Connie was spotted in a restaurant in South London with a man who seemed overly friendly. The familiarity between them suggested a connection to Tony Drew, Phil's brother. Recalling our night walk, Carlo pointed out the exchanged glances between Phil, Connie, and Terry, which now made sense. Confirming my suspicions, he mentioned seeing Connie's pen from a hotel in London. I inquired if it had happened there, and Carlo nodded in agreement. Expressing my determination, I told Carlo that my assistant had been monitoring their actions since the beginning of the previous week. I wanted to confront the man face to face, but Carlo cautioned against rash actions that could lead to serious consequences. He advised divorcing Connie and leaving him to handle the situation. Rejecting his suggestion, I insisted on handling it personally and wanted information on the man's residence, workplace, and other details. Carlo acknowledged having the information in the envelope, but stressed the importance of careful planning to avoid legal consequences. He proposed a strategic approach to eliminate any possibility of ending up in prison and asked for my agreement on the plan. It seems the person in question is currently single but has been through a divorce. Even though he doesn't have kids, he seems to prefer women, especially those who are already married. Maybe he's not into commitments. What are your thoughts on this? How well do you get along with your friend Phil? Carlo asked. I'm asking because he behaved oddly at the restaurant where Terry and your wife were. I've been keeping a close eye on him and suspect he might be aware of what's happening. If that's true, can we still consider him a friend? I noticed that too, I replied, and I'm starting to suspect his wife is involved in this, judging by their behavior. I see no reason to continue being around them more than necessary. So I think we should end this as soon as possible. If this was an isolated incident, I might not have paid attention, but after seeing it, I can't forget about it. It's all too overwhelming. Every time I see her, these images will haunt me. No, I can't forgive or forget. I understand, Carlo said, but in the current situation, you should prioritize your own protection. Taking the time to plan ahead will be helpful, even if it requires some patience. Trust me, you're going to need retribution. I informed Carlo that I needed time to carefully consider the situation, expressing my desire for both Phil and Connie to suffer. Leaning in, Carlo placed a business card in front of me, explaining that it belonged to an experienced specialist who was already informed about my situation. He encouraged me to call the specialist and convey what needed to be done, assuring me that he was also our cousin. Carlo chuckled at the connection between the specialist and our family. We have cousins everywhere, he joked. I couldn't help but chuckle as well. We continued to discuss our plan for another hour until we decided on a course of action. I dialed cousin Carl's number. We agreed to postpone its execution until all preparations were completed. Meanwhile, I had to find out the extent of Phil and his wife Terry's involvement in the situation. Leaving Carlo behind, I drove slowly back home. After parking the car, I went to the door, but there was no sound inside. Connie was not there. In the kitchen, I found a note on the table indicating that she had gone to Terry's. Understanding the message, I discarded the note and promptly contacted Carlo, informing him of Connie's claim. Despite her assertion, my surveillance revealed that Connie was currently at Phil and Terry's house, though Terry herself was absent. As mentioned earlier, I had someone keeping an eye on her, and he'd continue to do so. Later, 3 hours passed, and Connie finally returned home. Greeting me, she kissed my cheek and headed to the kitchen. When she inquired about my day, I mentioned Carlo's plan without divulging details. Observing her expectation for more information, after a minute of anticipation, she asked about the discussion. I replied that it concerned a cousin's personal file requiring permission and involved suspicions about a wife's behavior, seeking advice. Noticing the change in her expression, I smiled, acknowledging her attempt to appear nonchalant. Nevertheless, I reassured her that everything would be resolved in the end. She turned away, and the rest of the weekend dragged on slowly. Despite the strong desire, I could not bring myself to make love to her. I couldn't help but look at the photos that Carlo shared with me, where she is captured with Tony. I was surprised how she could continue a relationship with him and still behave completely normally around me. She had an exceptional talent for deception and acting, far surpassing all my ideas. Saturday night passed without any major problems, but on Sunday night, her body language made it clear that she wanted closeness. I kissed her gently, but the image of her with Tony wouldn't leave my mind, making me doubt that she really could only be mine. It felt like a betrayal. We both lay in bed in silence, lost in our thoughts. As soon as she fell asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed and went downstairs. I was sitting at my computer, immersed in work, when a message from Carlo caught my attention. Looking at my watch, I realized that it was about 1 a.m. Everything seemed to fall into place and completely coincided with our previous conversations. Feeling confident in my abilities, I came to the conclusion that now it remains only to plan a short trip with an overnight stay on Wednesday, and it will be possible to get down to business. I quickly replied to Carlo's message, confirming my agreement, but sleep did not come, and anger boiled inside me. In the morning, after a quick shower, I got dressed and went downstairs. Connie greeted me with a warm smile and served me a delicious breakfast, coffee, and toast. She settled into her seat and sipped her coffee delicately. I mentioned that I had to go to Leeds on Wednesday, and as I spoke, her eyes met mine over the rim of her cup. Sensing her thoughts, she casually inquired if I would only be gone for one night. I affirmed, but added that I wouldn't return until late Thursday night. Her gaze intensified as she asked if this was related to Carlo and the cousin I had mentioned, suggesting he might need support. Expressing my unease about Carlo, I admitted uncertainty regarding the kind of help he could provide. Reassuringly, she mentioned that I might be surprised, highlighting Carlo's formidable problem-solving abilities. Observing her pale expression, I realized she was actively formulating a plan in her mind. Glancing at my watch, I stood up from my seat, signaling the start of the workday. "It was time for me to leave, my dear. Take care of yourself and behave while I'm away," I said. I went to a meeting with a lawyer, discussed options for an hour, and signed the necessary documents. The lawyer already had copies of the envelope's contents. He assured me everything would be ready by Wednesday afternoon. Confirming our agreement, I hurried to the bank and moved all our savings to a new account in my name. Additionally, I sent a significant amount to Carlo, asking him to hold it for me. I left the current account alone, covering our bills, but we had almost no extra money. I emptied our safe deposit box of cash and jewelry, opening a separate account only in my name at another bank. I also decided to stop her allowance, thinking it would put her in a tough spot by the end of the month. Happy with my day, I entered my office and went about my usual work. Sadie, my secretary, was an invaluable assistant, handling work competently, maybe even more so than me. During a momentary break in signing documents, I noticed Sadie looking at me. Turning my chair, I faced her. We've known each other for almost 5 years. She's always been professional and devoted, though tension with Connie seemed present. I believed it was related to gender issues. Looking into Sadie's worried eyes, I realized I could no longer ignore the situation. The desire to confide in someone became overwhelming, and she sensed my inner turmoil. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my thoughts and informed her about potential disruptions this week. I emphasized that if I couldn't be there, she knew what needed to be done to ensure everything ran smoothly. She assured me of her support. Curious if she could assist further, Sadie turned around, a refined and intelligent woman of about 40 whom I trusted implicitly. Confessing to her, I revealed that Connie was cheating on me. Clearly taken aback, Sadie expressed her disbelief and asked if I had concrete evidence. Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded in confirmation. Feeling my pain, Sadie hugged me tightly, providing the comfort and support that seemed absent at home. Tears streamed down for the first time since I received the devastating news a few days earlier. She held me until I regained my composure. Looking into my tear-filled eyes and reassuring me of my goodness, she encouraged me not to let anyone tell me otherwise. Concerned about my future plans, she inquired about my intentions. Determined, I stated my decision to file for divorce and end the relationship completely. Despite my hesitation, I made it clear that I didn't want to involve her or anyone else. Worried, Sadie urged me to be careful and pleaded for a promise not to do anything rash. The rest of the day felt like a drag, each moment seeming like hard work. Sadie's devotion and support were invaluable, turning her into a precious friend who stood by me during this challenging time. Her husband, whoever he was undoubtedly lucky. She fearlessly protected me from any threats, dealing with them with her usual flair. I heard her push someone away with a stern warning, making me smile. I was pleased to have kind-hearted people like her by my side. When I got home, sitting with Connie and watching TV, the phone rang. She took it to the hallway to answer. Although I heard her speaking softly, the conversation remained unintelligible. After about 5 minutes, she returned. Curious, I inquired about the phone call. Connie dismissed it as unimportant, mentioning Terry discussing her claims and Phil initiating another pointless argument with a hint of annoyance in her tone. "I hope they find a way to reconcile," she added. Sensing my confusion, I asked, "What do you mean? Are they in serious trouble?" Sensing my confusion, I asked, "What do you mean? Are they in serious trouble?" "Phil didn't say anything," Connie replied, carefully watching my expression. I searched for signs that might reveal the truth. "Well," she began hesitantly, "it's not really a serious crisis, more of a small disagreement. I'm sure they'll sort it out." Suddenly it dawned on me. "Is this really what happened when we were in the restaurant?" I asked. Connie looked at me nervously, not realizing I had noticed the tension between them and her role in it. While spinning a web of lies, it became noticeable that Connie was entangled in her own deception. Despite her discomfort, I couldn't figure out Terry and Phil's role in this situation. I remembered their intense communication during our walk, an argument boiling all evening. "So, that's what you talked to Phil about?" I asked, trying to figure out if she was trying to mediate. Connie's response was restrained and somewhat frank. "Yes, Terry asked me to talk to Phil, that's all." Intrigued, I continued to extract information. "What was it about, Connie? Perhaps I can help." A smile appeared when I saw my wife struggle with the tangled web of lies. Sensing her anxiety, she calmed me down. "It's all right, S. I'm sure they are close to solving their problems," she offered optimistically. Expressing relief, I acknowledged the good news about my friend's improving marriage. However, a sudden anxiety prompted me to ask if he was cheating. Connie swiftly reassured me that there was nothing of that sort. My curiosity lingered, leading me to inquire if Terry might be cheating. Sensing my curiosity, Connie suggested not getting involved and letting them figure it out. Fully agreeing, I remarked, "That's precisely what I had in mind. However, when I see Phil, I might check to ensure he's okay." As I shifted my attention back to the TV, Connie's narrowed eyes signaled the end of our discussion. After a few minutes, I revisited the topic, questioning, what was the conversation really about if neither of them was cheating? Unable to resist, Connie abruptly left the sofa, visibly agitated, and hurried out of the room. I sat and chuckled to myself. By now, I had enough information, but the other couple's role was still a mystery. The rest of the evening passed with mutual avoidance, and we both preferred silence to more discussion. Deciding to address the issue of Phil and Terry the next day, I woke up early on Tuesday. I left the house just as Connie was coming down the stairs, still looking a little puzzled. "I have to move. Lots to do before I leave tomorrow," I told her without staying long and headed for the garage. As I moved, my thoughts returned to recent events. Until last week, everything was relatively calm. That changed when Connie met Tony a few months ago during a night out with Terry. They were in a small club with friends when Tony walked in, offered to buy everyone a drink, and caught the girls' attention. During that meeting, Terry noticed a connection between Tony and Connie. Worried, Terry expressed concern about Tony's character to her friend. She advised her to stay away from him, mentioning that he had made advances towards her in the past. In an attempt to calm Terry, Connie reassured her, stating that she had her phone with her and noting that Tony was an attractive and smooth man. Terry shook her head, emphasizing her warning and urging Connie not to entertain the thought. Terry had done her duty as a protector, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something unsettling was behind Connie's eyes. The rest of the evening passed without any notable incidents, at least from Terry's point of view. Despite Terry's warning, Tony managed to get Connie's phone number. Over the next few days, Tony somehow got Connie's number and made several calls involving her in innocent conversations accompanied by light flirting. As the next bachelorette party approached, Connie realized that Tony would be attending again. This time, there was dancing, and as soon as Tony took her in his arms, He began to use seduction tactics, showering her with flattery and compliments. He began numerous subtle touches while they were talking. Leaving the club with Terry's worried friend, who scolded her and urged her to end it before something happened, Connie stubbornly kept silent, brushing off Terry's warnings and insisting that nothing had happened yet. But when Terry saw her, Tony just smiled resolutely, continuing to get his way, confident that he would eventually win Connie over. In the following weeks, phone conversations between Connie and Tony became more frequent, and their flirting intensified. Tony began to seriously pursue Connie. The dynamic changed when Terry was unable to join their usual night out, giving Tony the opportunity he had been waiting for. It was during one of their conversations that he saw a chance to make his move. Tony, using his charm, managed to convince Connie to meet him at the club, emphasizing that it would be a friendly relationship, nothing more. Connie thought about the idea and, seizing on a sudden opportunity, eagerly agreed to the meeting. Unlike her usual outfit for meeting Terry, Connie dressed up, feeling that this occasion had special meaning. Excitement bubbled in her veins, overcoming any doubts she may have had. She couldn't hide her joy, and she didn't want to. In her opinion, talking to Tony created a connection, and she was ready for the next step. Without slowing down, she grabbed her purse and headed for the front door. Unable to contain her excitement, that important evening marked the start of a new chapter in Connie and Tony's life. Their bond grew stronger, and meetings became more frequent. Their evening was filled with flirting, gentle touches, and playful dancing. Tony took her to his car and drove her to the Marriott Hotel, believing Connie was ready for the next step. They spent the night together, their passion lasting until almost 1 a.m. When Connie realized the time, panic set in. She quickly got ready and dressed, urging Tony to take her home. Despite Tony's agreement, the journey alone would have taken at least another 30 minutes. That night served as a wake-up call for Connie, and she started feeling uneasy. But in the following weeks, she continued dating Tony, unable to resist the temptation of their connection. During my absence, she stayed with Tony at the hotel, engaging in various activities. Terry advised Connie to stop before facing consequences. Weeks later, Terry discussed the situation with her husband, Phil, hoping he could influence Tony. Terry explicitly asked Connie to stop and talk to Tony, seeking Phil's support. Phil was torn between loyalty to his brother and me, making it increasingly difficult to find a solution without causing serious consequences. Connie knew their romance should end soon. She understood the risk she was taking increased the allure of continuing the illicit relationship. It was a dangerous game, and if anyone found out, chaos would follow. The recent restaurant incident, combined with leading questions, showed the situation was getting out of control. Connie understood Tony didn't have sincere feelings, considering her only as an opportunity. Despite this, she still felt drawn to him. Deciding that tomorrow would mark the last meeting and the end of the destructive cycle, Connie made up her mind, intending to end it after one final night together. Despite the decision, she still had to convince Tony. Late at night, legal documents from the lawyer were prepared in her car. Feeling tense, I sought solace in my trusted bottle of whiskey. Observing Connie, it was clear she grappled with her problems. When she inquired about my well-being, I didn't immediately respond. Instead, I turned to her, meeting her eyes to gauge her reaction. She seemed scared and anxious, evidently affected by the events of the past day. I muttered that it had been a tough day and mentioned the need to shower for the upcoming meeting with Carlo. The mention of Carlo appeared to disturb her, carrying a sense of horror. After the shower, I went downstairs, catching Connie's gaze in the kitchen. Casually asking about dinner, she suggested ordering takeout, expressing her reluctance to cook. I agreed, and we settled on Chinese cuisine. I called and placed the order, and while waiting, we sat in the living room with the TV on. Dinner passed quietly, almost in suspense. Connie casually inquired about my departure time the next morning, to which I explained my plan to leave around 9 a.m. for an 11 flight. I added that the issue couldn't be addressed until the evening, and that it would be an opportunity to finally meet cousin Carlo, trying to find a positive aspect in the current situation. Acknowledging the importance of family, Connie looked at me with a hint of sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she was contemplating that tomorrow could mark the end of it all. The next morning, I woke up to the delightful smell of freshly brewed coffee, a scent I always appreciated at the start of the day. While I sipped the hot coffee, which served as a magical elixir that fully awakened me, Connie was preparing breakfast. I sat down at the table and began to eat toast, my stomach still feeling heavy from last night's dinner. Silence filled the kitchen while we both enjoyed coffee. A calm atmosphere prevailed. We exchanged fleeting glances, but quickly averted our eyes to avoid giving ourselves away. The atmosphere was tense, and we both wanted it to be over. Checking my watch, I realized it was time to leave. Urgently, I mentioned that I had to go and pick up Carlo from home. As I passed Connie, she looked at me with a smile and wished me a safe journey and a speedy return. Moving forward, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders, and tears welled up in my eyes. With a deep sigh of relief, I turned the steering wheel and drove away from my wife, deciding not to look back. My face was flooded with tears, and my heart was heavy with grief. It was a day of reckoning, the culmination of it all. A few minutes later, Connie picked up the phone and listened to the beeps in her ear. She whispered that I was gone and asked if the plan could still proceed that night. The response was affirmative, with assurances of making the night unforgettable. Connie explained that she had convinced Phil to leave them alone and shared that he was becoming increasingly upset with her. She inquired if he had mentioned anything to me, and the answer was affirmative, but she had instructed him to mind his own business. Despite the challenges, she expressed eagerness for the night ahead and shared the arrangements for their meeting at the same room as last time. Ending the call, the man couldn't help but smile. He quickly composed a text message with the details of the lovers' date, collected his listening equipment, and left the place of observation. Carlo looked at the message, a grim smile appearing on his face. He expressed concern about the situation and questioned my certainty about it. I assured him of my love for Connie and my determination to make her understand the gravity of her actions, even if it meant enduring lasting consequences with her lover. With some time before the action started, we decided to have a snack. Carlo dissuaded me from reaching out to Terry and Phil, emphasizing the potential legal consequences if they became aware of my awareness. He assured me that there would be time to address that later and asked me not to worry. Leaving the bar, I was introduced to Carlo's brother Alfredo and his daughter Alicia. Alfredo apologized for his daughter's impulsive nature and explained that they can be assertive these days. Expressing understanding, I greeted Alfredo warmly, emphasizing the importance of family. Alfredo smiled and conveyed his regards to his wife and the rest of his family. A little after 3 in the afternoon, an incoming call signal was heard on my mobile phone. Glancing at the screen, I noticed that it was Connie. I greeted her and asked what had happened. She explained that she called to ensure I had arrived safely and inquired if everything was okay. I assured her that we were both fine and mentioned that we were having a late lunch before continuing on our way. Curious about her evening plans, I asked about her intentions, subtly concealing my true agenda. She mentioned that she was going to visit Terry and believed everything was fine there. I responded, trying to maintain a neutral tone. Continuing the conversation, I casually mentioned that I was planning to call Phil later, as I believed he was going out with his brother. Expressing curiosity about Phil's brother, I inquired about his personality. Connie offered a vague response, mentioning that she had only met him once but found him to be somewhat similar to Phil. With a brief farewell, I explained that we needed to check into the hotel before our evening meeting. Wishing her a pleasant evening and asking her to say hello to Terry, I ended the call. I looked at Carlo, and he sensed the hidden pain in my expression. He offered his support, acknowledging that it was done, and suggested we go meet the others. Leaving Alfredo at the bar, we proceeded to the private rooms, where Carlo introduced me to a group of 4 people familiar to him. He assured me of their trustworthiness, emphasizing that they had proven themselves countless times in the past. At that moment, Carlo's phone rang, and after answering the call, he nodded, relaying the message that we would be leaving in 5 minutes. Observing my watch, I noticed it was already 8. Time was slipping away fast. The guys left the room and headed to the waiting car. They grabbed a minibus to reach their destination. At the same time, Carlo and I went out the back door and hopped into the prepared Mercedes. This is how my story brought me to where I am now. We parked the Mercedes on a quiet street, just 200 meters from the hotel. In silence, we sat there, and by 9 in the evening, Carlo's phone signaled a message. After confirming the team's arrival and placement, we stayed silent until another message appeared on Carlo's phone, indicating that the exit was guarded. "Okay, let's go," Carlo said, breaking the silence. After a moment, I followed suit, and we headed for the hotel lobby. Time seemed to have sped up. My heart raced with anticipation. Carlo got out of the car first and directed me to the indicated room number. Reaching door 415, a feeling nagged at me that my wife might be behind it with another man. Just as we reached the door, 4 men in hotel-style uniforms seemed to appear out of nowhere. Glancing around the corridor, relieved it was empty, Carlo warned about the nearby CCTV cameras. Leading the team into the bedroom, Carlo's determined eyes met mine. The lights turned on, revealing a scene that left my heart sinking. From my vantage point, I could see my wife in bed with Tony, oblivious to the impending intrusion. The details of what happened to her lover are hard to convey in this context. Everything unfolded in a whirlwind of emotions. Turning on the light, I entered the room. My wife, lying on the bed, locked eyes with me. Shuddering, she tightly shielded herself, tears streaming down her face. Muffled sobs and unintelligible mutterings escaped her mouth. Love and hate collided, and rage took the forefront among the overwhelming feelings. Carlo stepped forward, gripping my arm and gently taking an object from my hand. His determined eyes met mine, urging me to calm down and gain control of my emotions. At this moment, Connie, consumed by fear, stared at the 2 imposing figures in front of her, shaking her head vigorously. Tears streamed down her face as she remained wordless, intensifying the destruction of her evening. Sensing it was time to leave, I observed a subtle movement from Carlo, who was checking his phone. He mentioned that it was time for us to depart. Following him out of the room and leaving Connie behind, Carlo remarked that I had handled the situation well. He added that, for a moment, he thought I might lose control of my anger. I responded with a grim laugh, assuring him that, so far, it was just a good scare. The real lesson will be when she meets Tony again, I explained, and there's no need for me to get my hands dirty since the guys will handle him properly. Carlo understood my desire for Tony to know I was there, but assured me that Tony wouldn't forget the experience anytime soon. As we walked through dimly lit streets towards our destination, Carlo mentioned that rooms were ready for both of us when we were ready. We entered the bar, where Alfredo awaited us. Approaching, in the morning, Carlo's phone beeped with a message, confirming that everything was settled. Expressing my gratitude for what they did, I started to muse, but Carlo interrupted me, stating that it was over and I needed to figure out the situation with her. Understanding his point, no further words were exchanged. The weight of the situation pressed on me. As we left her at the hotel, I wondered how she would find her way home and what she would say about this unexpected turn of events. Now aware that I knew about her actions, would she admit to them or remain silent? Despite catching her in the act, I doubted she would willingly confess. Carlo's words brought me back. Rooms are prepared for both of you when you are ready. Unable to sleep, I replayed the events of the previous night in my mind, thinking through every detail. Thoughts of Connie filled my mind, and a heavy sadness settled within me. She was the love of my life, my everything, and now it's all been destroyed. The only way left was to face her and see how this would unfold. Divorce papers were already in my hands, with the official copy supposed to be delivered today. Returning home, she wouldn't have doubts about what I knew. A chilling thought crossed my mind. What if she doesn't come home? Uncertainty added complexity to an already turbulent situation. Now that she knew I caught her at the hotel, Connie would likely be afraid to return home. I realized I needed to take measures, possibly rescheduling the delivery of the divorce papers to wherever she could find refuge, maybe with Terry. Almost 7 hours had passed when Alicia abruptly woke me, informing me it was lunchtime and that I had 30 minutes. Carlo mentioned I had to catch an afternoon flight, so it was time to get up. Getting dressed, I saw a changed version of myself in the mirror, bearing the weight of recent events and signs of change. Sitting down with the others at the table, I sensed that the feeling of normality had turned surreal, yet oddly comforting. We shared a meal, talked, and even laughed. But time passed too quickly, and it was soon time to leave. Gathering our belongings, we headed to the waiting car. As we drove away, I gazed out the window, bidding farewell to the faces watching us. On the way home, I drove steadily and calmly. I dropped off Carlo, and Joanna welcomed him with joy, hugging him tightly like newlyweds. She then turned to me, offering a tight hug for comfort. Carlo reassured me, expressing his belief that everything would eventually be fine. Despite my speechlessness, his comforting hug offered a glimmer of hope. Departing with a plan to call later, I nodded in confirmation and drove home, attempting to avoid dwelling on empty thoughts. Upon reaching my front door and entering, an eerie silence pervaded the house. The heating provided warmth, but the cozy atmosphere was absent. With cautious steps, I explored the living room and kitchen, noting the emptiness and quietness. Checking my mobile phone, I found no calls or messages from Connie. Overwhelmed with disappointment and sadness, I sank into a chair in the living room. A photo of Connie and me on the mantel caught my eye, sparking anger. I impulsively threw the framed photo across the room as it crashed against the wall. The phone rang. With apprehension and curiosity, I answered the call, still carrying a residual tone of anger. "Hello," I responded. A hesitant female voice on the other end identified herself as Terry. Despite my harsh tone, she inquired about Connie, revealing that Connie was with her, upset and afraid to go home. Suppressing my anger, I asked Terry to let Connie talk to me. Advising Terry to ask Connie about the events, I listened as the conversation unfolded. After a while, Terry returned to the phone, expressing genuine concern for Connie, who remained silent. I instructed Terry to tell Connie that I would pick her up. In the background, I heard Connie scream, confirming my suspicions. Terry, uncertain of what to say, stammered, and I calmly acknowledged that I knew everything. Apologizing, Terry shared her unsuccessful attempts to stop the events with Phil. Expressing my sadness over the situation, I mentioned the impact on our friendship, but suggested avoiding further discussion. In response, Terry whispered an understanding acknowledgement and apologized once again. I took a deep breath, attempting to find some semblance of completeness in the midst of turmoil. With gratitude, I thanked Terry, acknowledging that our once strong friendship had been irreparably changed by the actions of those involved. Ending the conversation, I informed Terry that I wouldn't be coming for Connie, advising her to relay the message. I sternly instructed Terry that Connie's belongings would be packed and ready for her to collect, with a warning that any delay would result in disposal. Emphasizing that Connie no longer lived with me, I mentioned that some papers for her would be delivered to my address and urged caution in any actions or attempts to contact me. I stressed the need for careful consideration. Clearly and with strength, I spoke to Terry, laying out all the details and emphasizing that I hadn't heard from Connie since around 7:30 p.m. I anticipated some reaction after she received the documents, but according to Terry, Connie appeared very nervous when she arrived at their house. Carlo, finding humor in the situation, grinned, thinking about the upcoming day. I mentally listed tasks that needed attention. First, contacting my office to clarify work matters, then dealing with a locksmith, addressing banking issues, and handling logistics. Painful as it was to admit, the trust we once shared had completely vanished. Remaining in this relationship after the divorce papers were delivered last night was impossible. I expected to hear from Connie today, once she gathered her thoughts. But it was already 9 when a knock interrupted my thoughts. Upon opening the door, I found Terry and Phil standing there. Their unexpected presence cast a shadow in the room. Waiting in silence, Terry eventually spoke, expressing remorse for their actions. Acknowledging their request to come in, I gestured toward the living room. As they settled on the sofa, I took a chair, bracing myself for the necessary conversation. Curious, I asked, "So, what did you guys want to discuss?" Paying close attention to Terry and Phil, I listened as Phil began with an apology, admitting his failure to inform me about Connie's extramarital pursuits. Terry echoed his sentiments, expressing regret for being unable to reach Connie and prevent her actions. While their words evoked a sense of offense and betrayal, I recognized the sincerity behind their apologies. Wanting clarity, I questioned Terry about her statement that Connie didn't understand anything. Confused and concerned, I asked, "What do you mean, Terry? I was away on Wednesday, and when I called, Connie mentioned being left by Tony at a hotel. Are you suggesting something happened between them?" Phil, filled with concern, replied, "We're not certain. We tried contacting my brother, but there's been no response. Connie is unable to provide much information. All she said was that she felt tied up and that Tony had left her at the hotel." The growing anxiety within me intensified as I struggled to comprehend the events between Connie and Tony. Pressing for more details, I directed my disappointment toward Phil. "Come on, Phil," I urged. "She must have shared more than that. What happened? Clearly something went wrong. Did he misuse her?" Phil and Terry exchanged surprised glances, taken aback by the intensity of my anger. Summoning my strength, I redirected the conversation. I inquired about Connie's well-being after the delivery of the divorce papers. Terry affirmed this, describing Connie's emotional turbulence and the new outburst triggered by the documents. Connie's state of confusion and imbalance deeply affected her, intensifying my anger and fear for what traumatic events she might be withholding. Expressing my frustration, I asserted, "Well, she brought this upon herself. If she's hurting now, then so be it." Terry and Phil, taken aback by my intense anger, attempted to reason with me. Terry, with a cracking voice, urged me to consider reconciliation, emphasizing the severity of divorce and suggesting that I talk to Connie first. As I listened to Terry's plea, my anger began to wane, replaced by conflicting emotions. The decision ahead demanded careful consideration and open communication. Recognizing Terry's sincere concern as that of a true friend, I admitted to liking her despite their involvement. Terry's words compelled a serious approach. Deep down, I acknowledged that facing Connie was inevitable. Taking a deep breath, I decided, "All right, Terry, I will talk to her, but only after her belongings are removed from our house. It will be just her and me. I'll call her and provide details about when and where this conversation will take place. How does that sound?" Terry, overwhelmed with emotion, hugged me tightly, and I noticed Phil's confused and regretful expression. Expressing gratitude to Terry for her understanding, I assured her, "Thank you, Terry. I will contact her soon. Please ask her to wait for my call, and don't worry, I won't leave her in limbo for long." Phil, conveying regret, muttered sympathetically, "Sal, I'm sorry. My brother certainly deserved a good thrashing from you. I wouldn't blame you if you did." Observing Terry and Phil leave from the window, their hurried departure indicated their destination, my soon-to-be ex-wife. Lost in thought, I contemplated Terry's words, realizing there was some truth in them. It was time to talk to Connie, and this conversation could no longer be postponed. Feeling detached from the current situation, I sought solace in a conversation with my longtime friend Sadie. Our discussion lasted for half an hour, during which I attentively listened as Sadie shared details of her successful life without my presence. She truly was an extraordinary woman. When she touched on Connie's topic, her tone changed to that of a concerned mother. It felt like listening to my own mother's lectures. In the end, Sadie insisted I have dinner at her house tonight with her husband. Feeling somewhat obligated, I reluctantly agreed to her request. The rest of the day involved various changes. Locks were replaced, rooms were rearranged, clothes were packed or discarded, and photos were reorganized or destroyed. Each action symbolized moving forward and parting with the past. As evening approached, I found myself lost in thought, gazing out of the window and contemplating the task that lay ahead. Understanding the need to gather my strength for what awaited, I decided to postpone making the call until the morning. Feeling a sense of weariness, another restless night followed, offering no relief from the weight of anxious thoughts. In the early morning, just before 7:30, an unexpected call disrupted the silence. Phil's voice came through, delivering news about Tony's condition. Apparently, Tony had been in the hospital for several days, injured but in stable condition. The news had a minimal effect on my emotions, and my response carried a cold detachment. I made it clear to Phil that I harbored no sympathy for Tony, stating, "I hope you don't expect sympathy from me, Phil. As far as I understand, he was lucky that our paths did not cross. I don't have the slightest desire to show him any respect." Phil seemed to accept the frankness of my words and acknowledged the justified anger I felt toward Tony. He refrained from asking certain questions, recognizing the depth of my emotions. Expressing remorse for not being as good a friend to me as I had been to him, Phil conveyed his understanding of the irreparable past. I reassured him that it was not his fault and expressed gratitude for informing me about Tony. After bidding farewell and expressing love to Terry, Phil concluded the call. Placing the phone back on the stand, I turned my attention to the view outside the window. Contemplating the garden, I enjoyed the silence and reflected on the unfolding events. A calm atmosphere enveloped me as I observed random birds flying to the feeder and feasting on the seeds I happily supplied them. Watching the serene communion with nature through the glass always brought me a sense of calm. It was at such moments, immersed in the beauty of the natural world, that my thoughts could flow freely. Dialing Carlo's number on my mobile phone, I shared the news about Tony. His response was brief, but filled with a sense of satisfaction. He noted that the work was done well. Setting the phone aside, I took a sip of the coffee in my hand, relishing the aromas of the day. Soon the phone rang again, disrupting the peaceful atmosphere. This time I decided to let the answering machine handle it. Listening carefully, I heard Connie's trembling voice leaving a message, filled with uncertainty and emotion. "I'm sorry, but I have to explain. I need you. I need to get home. I'm so sorry." Connie's desperate plea echoed in the voicemail. Sobs interrupted her words. penetrating my soul and making my heart ache in my chest. Each tearful phrase caused a shockwave of emotions, leaving me breathless. When the message ended, I found myself breathing heavily, contradictory thoughts spinning in my head. I knew that today I would have to solve this situation, but I wanted her to wait so that she would understand that my decision was made not only in response to her message, it had to be a carefully thought-out decision. For the next few hours, I wandered aimlessly around the house, lost in deep thought. The once familiar rooms now seemed empty, emphasizing the void that had formed after Connie's absence. In place of her belongings, there were spaces that served as visual reminders of our life together. I contacted Sadie and asked for help from several people with a van to move all of Connie's things. Within an hour, the boxes and bags I packed were neatly loaded into the back of the van. I watched the car pull away, setting off to return Connie's things. Soon, I was expecting my phone to buzz with a notification about the delivery of her belongings. This marked the final completion of the one-way trip, the final stage of our life together. Terry called to inform me about the delivery of Connie's belongings. I expressed brief gratitude for the organization, feeling a sense of completeness. Terry updated me, mentioning that they stored most items in the warehouse, keeping only the ones I had marked as personal. Asked whether I would talk to Connie, I firmly instructed Terry to call her as I awaited Connie's response. My tone remained controlled but firm when I spoke to her. I interrupted her attempt to apologize, stating, "Leave it alone, Connie. Now you have answers to questions you never asked yourself when you were busy with other things." Despite her desperate pleas, I made it clear that we had nothing more to discuss. Firmly, I stated, "This is where our journey ends. Do you really think you can tell me anything to help me deal with this?" Connie continued to plead, asking to come home and talk. Prepared to listen, though unable to promise anything, I responded with fatigue in my voice, "I'll listen, but I can't promise anything." I concluded the conversation, carrying the weight of her words in my memory. Her voice held pain, and I wondered if she could sense the suffering in mine. Leaning back in my chair, I reflected on our marriage and the happiness I thought we shared. Doubt crept in, questioning how well I knew her and whether my assumptions about our relationship were too idealistic. Delving into introspection, I realized I might still have a lot to learn about the person I thought I knew closely. Although I didn't suspect anything until that fateful night, it dawned on me that Connie might have engaged in similar behavior before. Taking a deep breath, I decided to approach the upcoming meeting with restrained emotion, mentally preparing for what might be the last act of our marriage. The doorbell announced Connie's arrival, and nervously, I opened the door. Time seemed to stop. It was our first meeting after that solemn night at the hotel, and the shock resonated within me as she entered the living room. A thin sigh escaped her lips, replaced by a strangled sob. She noticed the empty spaces on the walls, devoid of photos and cherished souvenirs that once adorned our life together. Standing in front of me, covering her mouth with her hand, tears welled in her eyes. I stated coldly, bitterness in my voice, "Everything is gone." Pointing out the emptiness throughout the house, Connie expressed confusion. I reiterated that I never wanted this to happen. She pleaded, her voice shaking with remorse. I acknowledged that her actions had consequences, the result of her infidelity, extramarital affair, and connection with another man. In the ensuing silence, Connie sat down on the sofa. With a stern expression, I pressed her to speak. She apologized, expressing regret and admitting her inability to resist, describing it as independency. Struggling with emotions, I wondered if there was still room in my heart for forgiveness. I then revealed that I had talked to Terry and Phil, gaining a fuller understanding of what happened, and expressing frustration with the lack of clarity on why it happened. She shifted uncomfortably, looking down at her feet, admitting that she couldn't answer why she got involved with a new and exciting person. I argued about the undeniable fact that she slept with him, consistently expressing my resentment and disappointment over the course of several weeks. Connie, laden with guilt, acknowledged that she messed up and expressed a desire to find a way to move past it. Changing the topic, I inquired about the whereabouts of the person she was involved with. Connie denied referring to him as her lover, explaining that she went on dates with him but emphasizing her love for me and apologizing tearfully for her terrible mistake. Listening to her plea, anger boiled inside me as I questioned her sincerity and trustworthiness. I pointed out her deceitful actions and questioned why I should believe anything she said. Connie, recognizing the extent of my pain and betrayal, continued crying, realizing the precarious state of our relationship. Demanding to know if I had communicated with my counterpart, I harshly questioned her, waiting for her answer. She tearfully revealed that she hadn't heard anything about him and expressed her reluctance to know more, considering him the one who ruined her life. Noticing the missing wedding photo, Connie walked around the room, observing the void left by the absence of memories. Emotionally drained, she sank onto the sofa, acknowledging the irreversible loss. The silence between us reflected the vast gap created by her actions. Pleading for a chance and expressing a note of defeat but hope in her eyes, Connie asked if there was really no chance for reconciliation. Taking a deep breath, I met her gaze, conveying a mix of suffering and resilience. Declaring that her betrayal shattered my heart and constituted disrespect for our feelings and those of our friends, I asserted that our marriage was over. I left her to face the consequences of her choices, urging her to sign the divorce papers and leave. Expressing finality and fatigue, I stated that everything ended with her, instructing her to leave my house in the city for peace. Sitting dejectedly, Connie absorbed my words and slowly stood to leave. I followed her to the door, watching as she opened her car door. When she looked back and apologized, mixed emotions stirred in me. Closing the door, I sealed not only her exit but also the end of our marriage. 2 days later, Carlo informed me that Connie had left the country, escorted by his people. Realizing she wouldn't find peace in the city, I felt a sense of closure.
There you are. We have to see identification. We can mail the results because, as you may recall, we asked you for ID when you were here and we were able to verify your address. I'll be there as soon as I can. I walked through their door, introduced myself, and asked for Margie. She came out and we shook hands. She asked to see my identification. "Come with me, please," she said. I followed her into a small room. She asked me to wait. She left and came back a couple of minutes later. She handed me the pacifier and then spoke. "Sample A is yours, Sample B is from the hair you gave us, and Sample C is from the pacifier." We were able to determine that samples B and C are positively related. Sample A is not related to either B or C. "Thanks," I said, took the pacifier, put it in my pocket, took the papers and left. I got into my car. At least I didn't have a daughter calling some other man daddy, but someone else did. JAG was not authorized to recommend specific law firms or attorneys, but the JAG officer I spoke with was able to provide me with a list of approved attorneys and firms. The next day I started calling them. I made 6 appointments. At the 3rd appointment I found my man. He was a retired JAG officer and hated cheating spouses, both wife and husband. I spent over an hour telling him my story. When I got home, it was late. There was a letter in the mailbox. It was from Lydia. "Fred, 3 weeks are up." Lydia. Short and to the point. The return address was her parents' address in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I called her. "Hi, Fred," she said. "I won't talk about it over the phone, and I'm certainly not flying to Pennsylvania, so I guess you'll have to come here. If you mean Seattle, I'm already here. I sent a letter last week when I was there. I'll be at the house at 6:30. Come over then," I told her. She hung up. I didn't make any special arrangements. No drinks, no cheese, no crackers, nothing. This was supposed to be a business meeting. I put the DNA documents and my copies of the birth certificate and adoption papers on the government-issued coffee table. She pulled up to the driveway at 6:20 but waited until exactly 6:30 to ring the bell. I was in no hurry to answer it. Opening the door, I invited her in and indicated where she should sit. I sat on the couch. She sat in the uncomfortable straight-back chair across from me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pacifier and held it out to her. She grabbed it and held it to her bosom. "Thank you," she said, as if I'd given her $1 million. Then I handed her a copy of the DNA test results. "You already know I'm not the father, but this will confirm it." She reached for the results and took them with her left hand. The pacifier remained clutched in her right. "I take it you are Sample A?" she asked. "Yes." Then I pushed the rest of the papers toward her without saying anything. She leaned forward, read the title on the top sheet, and tears welled up in her eyes. She set the DNA test results aside and picked up the dissolution of marriage application. She started to read it, but the tears were already flowing freely and falling onto the form, so she set it aside. "Can I have a tissue?" she asked. "I don't have any." "You're not making it easy for me, are you?" she asked. "You cheated," I said. She nodded. "How many times?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "No, I just want to know." "One weekend, different men." "Just one?" "Who is he?" "Does it really matter?" "Again, I just want to know. I think I deserve it." "I'm not going to tell you." "Do I know him?" "I'm not going to tell you." "So you'd rather protect him than try to save your marriage?" She picked up the divorce petition. "Our marriage is over anyway, why ruin it?" "Okay, but you have to tell me why you lied about your daughter being not alive when born." When I found out I was pregnant, I wasn't sure if it was your baby or his. I thought about getting an abortion, but I couldn't. Over time, I was able to reason that you can't know for sure if it's your baby or not. When we found out it was going to be a girl, I was even more sure you wouldn't know because there is a special bond between dad and daughter, and I was sure you and her would look alike. As the time of her birth approached, I started to get nervous. Maybe you would find out she wasn't yours. Then you went away on a business trip, and my nerves calmed down a bit. I was glad you wouldn't be around when she was born. Then you told me you were flying home, and I started to get nervous again. My emotions had been on a roller coaster. Maybe you'll know, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll be there when she's born, maybe you won't. I was nervous. Then she was there, alive and perfect. She was placed on my chest, and I looked at her and fell in love. She was beautiful. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. She paused. Just like her father's. You have brown hair and brown eyes. No one in our families has blonde hair and blue eyes. I knew she wasn't yours. She was my daughter, and you were my husband. I loved you both, but I knew I had to choose between you. I chose you. The hospital staff helped me when I told them I wanted to give her up for adoption. Within 24 hours, I had the papers in my hands. They asked who the baby's father was, and I said I didn't know. They said it would be easier that way because if I knew who the father was, they would have to get his permission. I just held her in my arms. She was sucking on a pacifier when they brought me the papers to sign. I knew I had to tell you something, so I made up the lie that she was not alive when born and her remains were cremated. When you came home, I couldn't believe you didn't ask to see the birth certificate, certificate of death, or anything else. I still can't believe it. I trusted you, I said. I had no reason not to trust you. Besides, it was so traumatic that I saw no reason to add to our suffering by looking at those pieces of paper. Eventually, you and I got our lives back to normal, and I was almost happy. But a part of me was missing. It still is, and it gets worse every year on her birthday. I always took the time to pull out her birth certificate, touch her little footprints, and hold her pacifier. There were times when I wanted to put it in my mouth to feel closer to her, but it had some of my dried breast milk on it, and I wanted to preserve it, so I didn't. They must have scraped it off at the DNA lab. Oh my God, it's gone. She groaned, then looked at me. It's gone. Her milk is gone. You idiot, you took her milk. She fell to her knees and literally curled up in a ball on the floor. I picked her up and put her on the couch. I couldn't let her leave in that condition, so I covered her with a blanket and went to my bedroom, but not to bed. She remained there for several hours. At midnight, I heard the toilet flush. I went downstairs. She was sitting on the couch. Would you like some coffee? I asked. Yes, please. She sat down at the counter while I brewed her a cup. She took a sip. I guess I got a little cold feet, huh? Sort of. We sat in silence and drank coffee. More? I asked. Yes, please, she replied. Where are you staying? I asked, brewing 2 more cups. At the motel. You were there for more than 3 weeks. No, I was with my parents most of the time. Do they know the truth? No, I lied to them too. I told them that you and I were going through a difficult time and I needed to get away from you for a while. They paid for me to visit them. They think I came back to help sort out our difficulties. She looked around, walked over to the coffee table, pulled a pen out of her purse, sat down, signed the divorce papers without reading them, and left. When I woke up, it was the middle of Sunday morning. I spent the rest of the day thinking. I took the divorce papers to my attorney on Monday, and he filed them. I've been thinking a lot about who Lydia cheated with. She never told me who he was or how the affair started. It wasn't just that she cheated and got pregnant that made me angry, it was that she defended the idiot and wouldn't tell me who he was. The only thing she told me was that it only lasted 1 weekend. Fortunately, I was so busy at work that I didn't have time to think about anything else. 2 weeks later, I was back at Fort Hood, where Lydia and I were living when her daughter was born. Usually, military seminars are pretty intense, but this one was relaxed. We were divided into groups of 3 to work on a project. It turned out that there were 6 groups of 3, and there were 2 left, a major from Alaska and myself. We developed a close friendship almost immediately. It seemed like we'd known each other all our lives. His name was Keith Franklin, and as I said, he was stationed in Alaska at Fort Wainwright, the coldest base in the U.S. Army. But he loved it there. He was a computer genius, and we were so far ahead of everyone else that we had to slow down and wait for them to catch up. On Friday of the first week, we had lunch at the officers' club. He told me about his personal life. He cheated on his wife, and she divorced him. She is now living with some civilian, and his 2 children call the other man Daddy. Toward the end of lunch, I laid out my story too. When I finished, he had a strange look in his eyes. And you don't know who the man she had an affair with is? No, she didn't tell me. And that was here in Hood? Yes, 5 years ago. It's almost 6. Blonde hair and blue eyes, that's what she said. Come with me. We went to the Manpower Center. Everyone assigned to Fort Hood had to go through it. We walked right into the HR director's office. She saw us, stood up, and went around her desk to give Keith a hug. She looked to be about 60 years old and had a sparkle in her eyes. I liked her, and I hadn't even talked to her yet. Aunt Lucy, this is Fred Sadler. Hi, Fred, she said, shaking my hand. Hello, Mrs. Healy. The nameplate on her desk read Mrs. Healy. I began, call me Aunt Lucy, everyone does. Aunt Lucy, began Keith. Do you remember the fair-haired, blue-eyed officer who may have been here about 6 years ago? She thought for a few seconds. No, but I don't always see everyone who passes through here. They all have to, but that doesn't mean I see them. She thought some more. Fred Sadler, you were here around that time, weren't you? I remember that name. Yes, my wife and I were here, I said. I looked at Keith, as if asking how she remembered that. Keith looked at me. Aunt Lucy has Sam, and she can remember just about anything she's read, seen, or been involved with. That includes people. She can remember everyone she's ever met. Sam? I asked. Yes, superior autobiographical memory. It's a state of being, or a curse, Aunt Lucy interrupted. Or a curse, Keith continued. Very few people have it. Aunt Lucy is Fort Hood's institutional memory, especially when it comes to personnel matters. Isn't that right, Aunt Lucy? Unfortunately. I looked at her, then at Keith, then back at her. You remember everything? Everything that happens to me personally. Jesus, I said. How do you have room for all this? We don't know, it's just always there. Does it have any downsides, I asked? Oh God, yes. I remember the good as well as the bad. It can cause depression if you allow yourself to do that. I can only imagine, I told her. Aunt Lucy, Keith interrupted again. Fred, he pointed at me. He's looking for someone who was here at the same time. The only thing he knows about him is that he was blonde with blue eyes. She laughed. That's it? No height, no weight, no rank, no assignment, not even his initials? No, ma'am, I said. Calling me ma'am is a waste of good oxygen, Fred. I'm Aunt Lucy. Give me time to think and maybe ask around. Does it matter? Keith looked at me and I answered, yes, Aunt Lucy, it's important. Oh, he was about the same age as me when I was here, if that helps, and he was in the Army. Officer or private? I suppose he was an officer. So you don't even know if he was in the service? No, I don't. Or a civil servant? No, I'm sorry, I know it's not much to go on, she laughed. Yeah, there's just nothing to target there. Can't be more than 2,000 blonde-haired, blue-eyed men I've encountered in the last few years, but I'll see if I can narrow down the time frame. She took both of our phone numbers. 2 days later, she called Keith. I've been thinking about the man you asked about. I don't remember any blonde-haired, blue-eyed soldiers, either officers or privates, who were about the right age, but I know 2 civilians who work for the Office of Post Engineers. One has worked there for about 30 years, so he's probably too old. The other has been working there for about 10 years. He's in charge of new construction now, but he used to be the head of the plumbing department. His name is Kurt Weber. There are about 15 other blue-eyed blondes on post, but the ages don't fit, and I didn't bother trying to remember civilians living off base because I assumed that when Major Sadler was here, he didn't have time to make many civilian friends. Keith told me, and I immediately started planning how to meet Weber, find out if he was the right man, and maybe get a little revenge. The men who prey on the wives of our military personnel are the second lowest form of life on the planet. The lowest, of course, are those who prey on wives when the serviceman is overseas. These idiots deserve the worst fate imaginable. The next morning, I was sitting on the next street over from Weber's house in my rental car. I was hoping he was golfing or doing some home projects, so maybe he was on his way to the local hardware or lumber store. I'd been sitting there for almost 2 hours when I saw his car pull out of the garage and speed down the street. Thank God, I thought. I didn't feel like sitting here all day to see if he'd gone somewhere, but I was willing to do it if I had to. I followed him to Home Depot. We parked, and I followed him into the store. He was obviously known there because he talked to a few of the employees. There was a spot right in front of the door where there was a coffee bar. I knew enough about Home Depot to know that their regular contractor customers could treat themselves. Weber helped himself and stood sipping his drink while he chatted with one of the salesmen behind the counter. Watching Mr. Weber, I realized one thing. Not only did he have sex with my wife and make her pregnant, but he chewed gum with his mouth open. Other than spitting on the sidewalk, I couldn't think of anything more disgusting. The clerk Weber was chatting with had to go help a customer, so Weber took one last sip of coffee, spit the gum into a paper cup, and walked away, unwrapping another piece of gum. I walked over to the trash can, looked in it, and saw, right on top, a paper coffee cup with a piece of gum in it. I looked around, didn't see anyone, and took the cup. I got in the car and called Keith. I told him what I had. He laughed and told me to hurry back, that he might have something bigger by the time I got there. When I arrived, he was literally jumping from place to place and waving some papers around. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "You won't really believe it." He grabbed my arm. "Look at this." "No, you better sit down." I did. He sat down next to me and put the papers in front of me. "Now look, there were a few names and an address. So I asked, so what?" "That's Hope's name, address, and her family's name. Her name is Sarah now, Sarah Randolph. I hacked into the files of an adoption agency. Those files are encrypted better than the nuclear missile launch codes carried by the President of the United States." He then stopped and calmed down. "Well, I didn't personally hack their files, my brother did, but it's the same thing." I started to laugh. "That's great, Keith. But what exactly am I going to do with it?" "I have no idea, but you have them. Maybe we can blackmail someone." "Oh, that's great. I can already see the headlines. 2 Army officers tried to blackmail a 6-year-old foster child. That's a great one." He tossed the papers on the coffee table and leaned back in his chair. "Yes, I see where you're going with this." He got a little flustered again. "But we cracked their defenses. That's something." "Yeah, that's something," I said, laughing. I carried the papers and coffee cup back to my bunk and placed them on the desk. I have no idea why I did it, but I looked up the address where Hope lived and drove there early Sunday morning. It was almost 200 miles to Corsicana. The house was a typical suburban house. I sat outside for about an hour, observing American suburbia on a typical Sunday. The noise of a few lawnmowers, the screams of children, and the chatter of neighbors. No activity came from Hope's house until almost noon. A car pulled up to the driveway. There were 3 people in the car. A man was driving, a woman was in the front passenger seat, and a child was in the right rear seat. The woman got out of the car, closed her door, and reached for the right rear door. I was at the ready with my cell phone. The woman removed the child from the car seat, placed the child on the ground, then knelt down to straighten the baby's dress. I had just enough time to take a few pictures. I heard a noise next to my car. A woman and a child were walking by. "Sarah!" The child next to my car squeaked, and she ran toward the other child, who I realized was Hope, and ran toward her. They were only a few feet away from my car, and I took a few more quick pictures. I started my car and drove off before either of the 2 women became interested in the strange car and man parked on their street. I drove a short distance away and stopped to look at the pictures. 4 were absolutely perfect. I could even make out her blue eyes. I drove back to Fort Hood. The following week, Keith and I finished the course with ease. We graduated on Friday and then had dinner and a few drinks together. Saturday morning, we went to the airport and flew home, Keith to Alaska and me to Seattle. The following Monday was a school day, so I had the day off. I took Lydia's and Hope's DNA reports to the DNA testing center. The lady didn't remember me until I reminded her about the pacifier. I gave her Lydia and Hope's DNA results and handed her the coffee cup with the gum. "See? You in 3 weeks," I said as I left. In fact, it only took 2 this time. She gave me the results over the phone. "It's a married couple, no doubt," she said. "Mother, father, and child." She would send me the official results in the mail. Okay, I had all the information I needed, but what was it for? What was I going to do with it? All it did was confirm that Weber was, in fact, the guy Lydia had cheated with. I went to Walmart and bought paper and envelopes. I also made copies of 2 photographs of Hope and the DNA reports belonging to Weber, Lydia, and Hope. On the DNA reports, I cut off anything that could tell where the report came from. I put it all in an envelope. I made sure I had gloves on from the moment I opened the bag of paper and the box of envelopes, made copies of the photos and DNA reports, and even used self-adhesive stamps and water, not saliva, to seal the envelope. I made every effort to keep it untraceable. I addressed it to Mrs. Kurt Weber at their home address. I also included Lydia's name and her parents' address because I had no idea where she was. Then I drove to Seattle's main post office and dropped the letter in the mailbox. I had no idea what would happen in Texas' home of Fort Hood and the Weber family when the package arrived. The news from Keith was a little over a month old when I got a call from Aunt Lucy. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer," she said. "I'll do my best." "Whatever you're doing isn't good enough. I need complete honesty. Is that what you and Keith did to Weber?" "Aunt Lucy, I don't mean to sound smart, but what did we do to him?" "Set him up so his wife would file for divorce." "Okay, here's what I did. Keith had nothing to do with it." I told her the truth, most of it anyway. I omitted Keith's part. You certainly stirred up a hornet's nest. Apparently, when his wife received your package, she didn't know if your DNA was his or someone else's, so she did it herself. She took some of his DNA and sent it off for processing. She also sent the profiles of that woman and the baby. They matched, and that's where it all went downhill. Who was the woman he was flirting with? She was my wife, Aunt Lucy. Oh Jesus, I thought it might be something like that. Well, he was brought into the office yesterday and he's not thrilled. He was ranting and raving all over the base. Good hearing from you that his marriage is over is the best news I've heard in a while. I just feel sorry for his family. It was over for me. Lydia and I were divorced and Weber was on the road to divorce. I folded all the papers Keith had given me into a folder and put it in a box with other things I no longer needed but kept anyway. My life was moving on. Over the next few months, I went on a couple of dates, but nothing much happened. 2 years later, I returned to Fort Hood. I was surprised because I expected to be sent overseas like 90% of my classmates. Once in Hood, I found myself in Aunt Lucy's office. "How did you get back here?" she asked. "I have no idea." "Yes," came a voice from the past. It was newly promoted Lieutenant Colonel LTC Keith Franklin. He walked into the office, closed the door, and we shook hands. It turned out I needed an assistant, and a major who had just graduated from CGSC was just what I needed, so I asked for him. Keith and I had talked a few times since we arrived at the seminar but hadn't seen each other. I was glad to see my friend. After registering, I took a vacation for 2 weeks. The first thing I did was to look for a house. Lydia and I had been saving up to buy it. I assumed that she would get half of it in the divorce, but since she didn't show up in court, I got everything. The branch manager walked by. He introduced himself as Dwight Randolph. We moved here about 6 months ago and settled in a brand new neighborhood. The houses are very nice and inexpensive. You get a lot of value for your money. He told me this, then went to his office and returned with a business card from the agent whose services he had used. I called her, and it only took me 3 days to find what I wanted. I paid more than half of the down payment, and the bank was happy to finance the rest. I started working with Keith and moved into my new house. The first things I bought were a bed, a chair, a big TV, and a lawnmower. I was spending my first night in my new house. It was already dark outside, and I had no curtains or drapes. There weren't even enough sheets to cover the big front window. I had just opened a beer and was holding a slice of pepperoni pizza in my hand when the doorbell rang. I had long since gotten off the no red meat diet Lydia had kept me on. I opened the door, and there stood a woman. "Hi, neighbor," she said. "My name is Samantha Randolph, but everyone calls me Sammy. We live in the neighborhood. We haven't lived here long ourselves, and I just wanted to say hello, introduce myself, and tell you that if you need anything, just ask." "Is your wife here?" I smiled. "Fred Sadler, no wife, divorced." I saw her frown. "But don't worry, I don't throw loud wild parties or even soft wild parties." She smiled. We chatted for a few more minutes before she left. The first week in my new home flew by. On Saturday morning, 3 women rang the doorbell and brought food. They also brought decorating ideas. They had seen my empty house with the lights on at night as I sat in it with nothing but a chair, TV, beer, and pizza. They decided it was time to help me. The ringleader was Sammy Randolph. A couple of hours later, I had a slightly worn but nice leather couch, a dining table and chairs, and a small coffee table to keep the pizza off the floor. The ladies were about to leave when 3 small children came running in, chasing each other. One of the ladies, Ruth, grabbed 2 of the children, and Sammy grabbed the third. "Calm down, Sarah," she said, kneeling beside the child and brushing her blonde hair away from her blue eyes. "This is our new neighbor, Major Sadler." "Hello," she said confidently. "My name is Sarah." I leaned over. "Hi, Sarah," I said, looking into her piercing blue eyes. Blonde hair and blue eyes. I shook my head. "How old are you, Sarah?" "I'll be 7 soon." I stood up and we all said our goodbyes. As soon as they left, I went to the room that was to be my den, found the right box, opened it, and pulled out a folder. In it were the pictures I had taken. It was the same baby. I hadn't paid attention to the names of the parents before, but now I did. The adoption papers named Dwight and Samantha Randolph as Hope's adoptive parents. Sammy and her friend mostly decorated my house. It took a few weeks, and when it was done, we had a neighborhood open house. Sammy invited her sister-in-law, Joni Payne, who happened to be divorced. Oh, I hadn't enjoyed female companionship in a long time, and Joni and I hit it off right away. She was the last to leave the party, and I couldn't wait to call her. The next day, we met for lunch and had dinner with Dwight, Sammy, and Sarah. Sarah was brief because she wanted to go play with her friends. Over the next few months, we were together as often as possible. The first night we spent together was very good. We were sitting at the kitchen island when the doorbell rang. I threw on my robe and went to answer it. It was Sammy. "Good afternoon, Fred," she said as she walked inside. We were wondering. She saw Joni. "Well, what do we have here?" she asked, heading toward her sister-in-law. Joni was sitting on a stool, eating a ham and cheese sandwich. As Sammy approached her, she set the sandwich aside and turned to face her sister-in-law. Her robe was open, and Sammy reached up to close it. Joni laughed. "Too late for modesty, sis. He's already seen everything. In fact, Never mind," Sammy said. I left the room and went upstairs to get dressed. When I came back, they were still discussing my bedspread. When they saw that I was dressed, they fell silent. The following weekend, Dwight and Sammy asked Joni to watch Sarah while the two of them went out to dinner. We were in the backyard watching Sarah in her sandbox. Without looking at Joni, I said, "She's a beautiful child, isn't she?" "Yes, she is." "Did you know she was adopted?" "Really?" "Yes, they've had her since she was born. According to the adoption agency, the birth mother was married, had an affair with a man she doesn't even remember, and got pregnant. Her husband was in the military. She didn't want him to find out about her affair, so she gave Sarah up for adoption. Dwight and Sammy were there to take her home. Sarah is the name her own mother gave her." "No, that name was Hope. It's on the birth certificate, but Sammy and Dwight changed it. Sarah suits her better." "What happened to the birth mother and her husband?" "I have no idea. The adoption agency closes their files very tightly. They don't give the birth mother access to information about the adoptive family and vice versa." Sarah came over and wanted to sit on Joni's lap. She leaned her head against Joni's and fell asleep almost immediately. A few minutes later, Joni asked me to carry Sarah into the bedroom and put her to bed. It was my first time touching her, and I felt very uncomfortable. I gladly laid her down. 7 months later, Joni moved in with me. A year after that, we were married. We had a very happy year until the Army intervened. We were told we were being sent to Germany for 3 years of service. We took 2 trips to the States, one when her father and Dwight's father died, and the other for the reunion. Both times, of course, we saw Dwight and Sammy. We saw Sarah at the funeral, but when we went back for the reunion, she was at camp. After 3 years, we received orders to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was going as a new LTC assigned to the post headquarters as an executive officer under the post commander. This was normally a position for a colonel, not a junior lieutenant colonel, but I didn't mind. In the military world, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. To help me get settled in, the staff organized a series of briefings with the various departments that support the post. One of the briefings was to be given by a post engineer. Representatives from that department, as well as the post engineer himself, were already in the conference room when I arrived. I sat down in my seat at the table and watched as a blue-eyed civilian stood up to begin his speech. His hair was slightly blonde but with a touch of gray. He introduced himself as Kurt Weber. I just stared at him. He had been talking for an hour, and I hadn't heard a word, and my gaze never left his face. It was obvious that he was uncomfortable with me looking at him. At the end of his speech, he asked if I had any questions. "Tell me, Mr. Weber, have you ever been to Fort Hood?" "Yes, sir. I was in the engineering department." "Did you like it there?" "Yes, sir. Why did you leave?" "It's rather personal, sir." "You are correct." I withdraw the question. "I'd just like to know about the people I work with. I seem to recall a scandal at the Fort Hood engineering department a few years ago." "Do you know anything about that?" "I vaguely recall something about one thing. There was someone cheating, if I remember correctly." "Ah, well, I just remembered something. Thanks for the briefing. If you need anything at headquarters, feel free to contact me." "Just in case you forgot," I pointed to the name tag on my uniform. "My name is Sadler, Sadler, Fred Sadler. I wouldn't want you to forget it." I was still looking straight into his eyes, and I could see the light. Bulb turn on and his eyes get huge. Kurt Weber became several different colors, ranging from red to pale gray. I got up and walked away. In the afternoon, I learned that Mr. Kurt Weber had requested a transfer. Unfortunately for him, this request had to go through me. When I received it the next day, I wrote in large letters, "Response, I have plans that involve Mr. Weber's expertise. He will play a key role in the realization of these plans." The next day, to the surprise of almost everyone, Mr. Kurt Weber tendered his immediate resignation. I signed it. Every day, I fell more and more in love with Joni. I watched her become increasingly beautiful and hot. Every morning, I looked in the mirror and saw an aging, middle-aged man, wondering what she saw in me. But whatever it was, I was grateful for it. We cherished our time together, and years flew by much faster than I wanted. We were stationed in Alaska and traveled to Killeen to visit Sammy and Dwight. On our first evening, they told us about a decision they had made with Sarah, who was almost 18. She had always known she was adopted and was now interested in finding her biological parents. Dwight and Sammy supported her decision, but the adoption agency offered no help, citing compliance with the law. All we heard that first day was how outdated the laws were and how they needed reform, especially since it's important for an adopted child to know their birth parents' health status. They decided to use a website dedicated to DNA and ancestry. They sent Sarah's DNA and waited to see what happened. Sarah hoped her biological mother could attend her high school graduation, but since it was only a couple of weeks away, they doubted it would happen. That night, Joni and I were already in bed when she asked, "What are you going to do?" "About what?" "About Sarah." "What about her?" "Come on, Fred, married couples don't have secrets, or shouldn't have any. I found your little file 6 months after we were married. She can avoid DNA testing if you tell them everything you know." "Oh crap," I said. "Yeah, oh crap. Why have you been silent all these years?" "I'm not sure. I guess I knew how sensitive you'd be about it, and Dwight and Sammy didn't need to know, so I kept quiet. But now it's become important, and you have to address it. Any suggestions on how I can do this?" "Just tell the story, I suppose. How do you think they'll take it?" "Dwight is my brother and just like me, so he'll take it normally. Sammy is the dark horse." "Okay, tomorrow we'll get Sarah out of the house and tell them." She leaned over and kissed me gently. "Do I ever bore you?" she asked. "What a silly question," I said. "Of course you don't. Why did you even ask?" "Because you haven't touched me all day." I grinned and reached for the buttons on her pajamas. "I can fix that right now." The next morning was Sunday. Sarah was picked up by her best friend, and they went to the mall. I gathered the four of us around the table, took a deep breath, and began. I started by telling them that Joni and I had packed our things before we went downstairs so we were ready if they wanted to kick us out. They looked at us, and Joni shrugged. "Sarah doesn't need to give DNA to find her biological parents." "I know who they are," I said. The looks they gave me made it clear I needed to explain, so I told them the whole story. When I finished, I took a deep breath and looked around the table. Dwight just stared at me while Sammy had tears in her eyes. After a few seconds, she stood up, walked over to me, took my hands, pulled me into a hug and said, "Oh, poor guy, living with that all these years and not being able to talk about it. No one deserves that." She hugged me again. "What do you think, Dwight?" she asked her husband. "I'm trying to calculate the probability of how we all ended up together. I don't think there's a big enough number." "So what do we do now?" asked Sammy, returning to her chair. "I think Fred should contact his ex-wife and invite her to the graduation, since Sarah wants her there," Joni said. "Yeah, why me?" I protested. "Because you started it," Dwight grinned. "But who's going to contact Weber?" "Not me," I said, and told him about the last time I saw him. "You never told me that," Joni said. "I didn't realize you knew the whole story, did I?" She leaned over and kissed me. I love this woman, I thought. Later that day, when Sarah returned, Dwight and Sammy told her about it. She was both nervous and excited and wanted us to continue. The only way I knew to contact Lydia was through her parents, if they were still alive, if they still lived in Mechanicsburg, and if they still had a landline. I waited until Monday morning and talked to a private investigator. I asked him to help me find Lydia's parents and Kurt Weber. It took him 2 hours to get the parents' phone number. It took longer to find Weber. I called Lydia's parents, reminded them who I was, and told them I needed to talk to Lydia. I gave them my phone number to give to her. Not an hour later, my phone rang. "Hello, this is Lydia Bowman." I was given this number. "Hi, Lydia." "Fred?" "Yeah." "How's it going?" she asked, trying to think of something clever to say, but I couldn't. "Actually, I'm doing great. How are you?" "Very well, Lydia. I need to talk to you about something very important." "Okay, go ahead." "Not over the phone. Tell me where we can meet and we'll talk in person." "Explain it to me. We haven't spoken in years, and suddenly, out of the blue, you have something so important that it needs to be discussed in person?" "That's it?" "I'm sorry, Fred, I'm not buying it." "Okay, but remember I gave you a chance." "A chance at what?" "Come on, Fred, what's the matter?" "Only in person, Lydia. Call me if you change your mind." Wait, okay, damn it, we live in Vegas." "That's better. I'm flying out there tomorrow, and I'll call you when I land. You decide where you want to meet." The next day, we met in the lobby of the Bellagio Hotel. I guess she needed a lot of witnesses. "Hi, Lydia." "Hello, Fred. This is my husband, Roland Bowman." "Hi, Roland." I turned my attention back to Lydia. "I need to see you alone for 10 seconds. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Roland. Whatever you say, but this is about the hope you had." She turned pale. "Can we still talk?" "Yes, he knows about her." "Okay, let's sit down." We found as quiet a corner as we could, given where we were. I recommended something to drink. "Wine will do." We agreed to a red, and I ordered it. We let the waiter pour our glasses. I paid for the wine and we all took a sip. Her name is Sarah. She is graduating in 2 weeks and wants you to be there. Roland and I watched her faint with a glass of wine in her hand, not spilling a drop. Roland took the glass, set it down, and patted her cheeks until she came to. What did you say? I repeated it, then pulled out Sarah's picture and showed it to Lydia. She started crying, gently touching the picture. She's beautiful. Where did you get this? I took it yesterday in her living room. You took it? How? Why? I told her the whole story from beginning to end, including our failed attempt to find Kurt Weber. She didn't know I knew his name and was shocked again. Initially stunned, she quickly grew really angry. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you keep her from me all these years? Her voice got louder and louder. Roland jumped up. Calm down, calm down. You gave up all rights to her. Fred is breaking the law by doing this now, so chill out. She calmed down. When can I see her? At her graduation if you want to come. Of course I'll come. Can't I see her sooner? You both need time to get used to it. Take your time. How about we get there the day before? She smiled. That would be wonderful. Now, how about I take a picture of you so she can see what you look like? Okay. We found a spot outside for her to pose. When I started to leave, she rushed over, hugged me, and kissed my face and head. Not too demonstrative, is she? Roland asked, laughing. I decided I liked him. That same afternoon, I flew back to prepare Sarah. I showed her a picture of Lydia. She's beautiful, Sarah said. She was very nervous, but excited at the same time. For the first time since I'd known her, she hugged me. Thank you, Uncle Fred. Now we know where you get your beauty, said Sammy, snuggling tightly against Sarah. Do you know what my birth father looks like? Sarah asked timidly. The other 3 adults looked at me with widened eyes, waiting to see what I would say. I thought for a moment before I spoke. Let me tell you that. You got your blonde hair and blue eyes from him. The 3 adults breathed a sigh of relief. We had only taken a week's vacation, so I had to go back to Alaska. But Joni stayed behind to help everyone prepare for the big day. I left for Alaska, promising to be back 2 days before graduation. The day before I was due back in Killeen, I got a call from the private detective. The most he'd been able to find out about Weber was that after leaving government service, he'd taken a job as a consultant to the government of a Middle Eastern country. Like several other American consultants, he disappeared shortly after arriving in country and has not been seen since. I met Lydia and Roland at the airport and drove them straight to Sarah's house. When we entered, she was standing in the middle of the living room. I let Lydia go first. They looked at each other for a long time, then Lydia spoke. I brought you this, she said, pulling out a pacifier. It belongs to you, and I thought you might want it back.
Hey everyone, let me start with a question. Have you ever been cheated on? Maybe you caught them in the act, maybe you found out through texts, or maybe a friend tipped you off. Most of us have been there in some way. But let me tell you, my story is a little different. It wasn't some sneaky message or a lipstick stain that exposed my wife's affair. No, it was my dog. Yeah, that's right. My wife's infidelity was exposed by my German Shepherd. Now, before I dive into that mess, I should introduce myself. I'm just a regular guy. I work a steady job, provide for my family, and always thought I was doing a decent job of being a husband and a father. I've got 2 kids who mean the world to me, and until recently, I thought we had a pretty solid life. That's how it always is, right? You think you've got everything under control until the rug gets pulled out from under you. My wife, let's call her Sarah. She's beautiful, and I won't deny it. The kind of woman who can turn heads without even trying. And yeah, I used to be proud of that. She had this energy, this charm that drew people in. We had our issues, of course, money fights, the usual disagreements that come with a long marriage, but I never thought it would come to this. I never thought she'd betray me like that. Now here's where things get wild. It was just a regular day. I came home from work, tired, probably thinking about what to make for dinner or what show to zone out on. And then there's Max, my German Shepherd, trotting into the room like he always does. Only this time, he wasn't bringing me one of his toys or a random stick he found in the yard. No, this time Max had something else in his mouth. It was a used condom, a filled condom. I just stood there, frozen, staring at it as if I couldn't believe my own eyes. I mean, what the hell was I looking at? Max was wagging his tail, proud of his find, but I could feel the blood drain from my face. It was unmistakable. The thing was used tied off and packed with someone else's. Well, you get the idea. And it sure as hell wasn't mine. My mind started racing, piecing it all together. While I was out there busting my ass at work, some other guy had been here in my house, in my bed, fucking my wife. And here was the proof, dripping from the edges of that condom like a slap in the face. Now, most guys would have lost it right there, screamed, thrown things, maybe even packed up and left. But not me. That's not how I handle things. I don't panic. I don't make a scene. I plan. So instead of blowing up in rage, I did something else. Something that I'd been planning in my head the moment I saw that thing in Max's mouth. I took the condom from him, and I didn't throw it away. Nope. I walked into the kitchen, thinking about what to do. What's the best way to handle this? How do I make her pay, but on my terms? That's when the idea hit me. I'd make her a milkshake. 2 milkshakes, actually. 1 for me and 1 for her. But hers would be a little extra. I dropped the condom into the blender. The used condom, filled with this asshole's cum, and blended it right into the milkshake like it was just another ingredient. I know it's sick, but at that moment, all I could think about was payback. I wanted her to swallow the same disgusting betrayal she'd been feeding me. I wanted her to taste what she'd been doing behind my back. Once they were ready, I called her into the kitchen. "Hey babe, made you a milkshake," I said as calm as ever. She had no idea. She took the glass from my hand, smiling like everything was fine, like she wasn't sneaking some other guy into our bed whenever I was gone. She took a sip, and immediately her face scrunched up. "This tastes weird," she said, her eyes narrowing as if she could tell something was off. I just smiled and leaned back against the counter. "It's a secret ingredient," I told her, keeping my voice steady, like it was no big deal. She laughed, took another sip. "What is it?" she asked, still smiling, still oblivious. "That's why it's a secret," I said, watching her down the drink. She had no idea what she was drinking. No idea what I knew. I sat down on the couch afterward, flipping on the TV like nothing had happened. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew I had to keep it together. This wasn't the time for a confrontation. Not yet. I wasn't about to explode and give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten to me. I wasn't just thinking about revenge. I was thinking about the long game. Because let's be honest, the moment I made that shake, I knew our marriage was done. I knew I was going to file for divorce. But it wasn't enough to end it. I needed to win. I needed to make sure that when the dust settled, I'd be the one standing with the kids. That's what mattered most to me, my children. And if I wasn't careful, the court would hand them over to her. Why? Because our incomes are about the same, and let's face it, the system's rigged for the moms. She'd play the victim card, bat her eyelashes, and walk away with the house, the kids, and everything else. I couldn't let that happen. So, I stayed calm. I waited. I played the part of the loving husband, even as she drank down that disgusting milkshake without a second thought. This was just the beginning. She didn't know it, but her world was about to come crashing down. And when it did, I'd be ready. The real game had only just started. After what I did with the milkshake, I knew I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. This wasn't about quick revenge or some petty confrontation. I was playing for keeps, and the stakes were high. My kids, my life. I couldn't let her walk away from this unscathed, especially not after what she'd done. The next move had to be mine, but I needed time and space to execute it properly. So, I decided to take a long vacation from work. Now, I'm not talking about a tropical getaway. No, I told my boss that I needed time off to deal with some personal issues, and luckily, I had enough leave saved up to make it happen without raising suspicion. I needed to be out of the house, or at least seem like I was out, so she wouldn't suspect a thing. Every morning, I'd wake up, dress as if I was going to work, and head out the door. But instead of going to the office, I'd circle back a little while later and slip in through the back entrance. Our house has this side door that's barely noticeable, perfect for sneaking in unnoticed. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. On the 3rd day of my vacation, I saw it with my own eyes. My wife, Sarah, was having her affair right under our roof, in the same bed we shared, while I was supposed to be at work. She wasn't even trying to be subtle about it. It was almost like she didn't care if she got caught, as if my work routine was so predictable, she thought I'd never catch on. That's when I realized I needed solid proof. Words weren't going to be enough in court. I couldn't rely on a hunch, or even the used condom Max had brought me. No, I needed irrefutable evidence to back me up, and that's when I got the idea to install hidden cameras. Honestly, I was surprised at how easy it was. These things aren't as expensive or complicated as I thought. A couple of trips to some online shops, and I had everything I needed. Tiny, unobtrusive cameras that I could hide in strategic places around the house. The bedroom, the living room, even the hallway where she brought her lover in and out of the house. Setting them up took a little finesse, but once they were in place, it was like I had a front row seat to her lies. But I wasn't done yet. You see, I wasn't just interested in catching her cheating. I wanted to break her down psychologically, and I wanted to be smart about it. Divorce courts can be tricky, and I knew she'd try to paint herself as the victim. So, I needed her to come off as unstable. That's when I started nudging her toward her therapist more frequently. Sarah had been seeing a psychologist on and off for a while, mostly for stress and anxiety. Nothing too serious, but enough for me to know there was a vulnerability I could exploit. I started planting little seeds, manipulating situations to make her feel like she needed those sessions more. I'd create arguments out of nothing, push her buttons just enough to make her feel on edge. Sometimes I'd mention how concerned I was for her mental health, how I thought it might be a good idea for her to see the psychologist more regularly. Other times, I'd bring up old issues from our marriage, making her feel like maybe she was the problem, subtly pushing her towards self-doubt. It wasn't hard. She was already fragile, and I knew exactly where to apply pressure. It worked. Soon enough, she was booking more appointments, convinced that the increased stress in her life had nothing to do with her own actions, but was somehow tied to our marriage, to me. Perfect. While all this was happening, I wasn't sitting on my hands. I'd already contacted a lawyer. A good one. I didn't want just any run-of-the-mill divorce attorney. I wanted someone ruthless, someone who could help me make sure I got what I deserved. When I explained the situation, my lawyer was quick to advise me on what needed to be done. We began documenting everything. Every bit of evidence I collected from those hidden cameras, every strange expense on her credit card statements, every late-night trip out of the house. We were building a case, and with every passing day, I was getting closer to my goal. She had no idea what was coming. Sarah thought she was getting away with her affair, and as long as I played dumb, she'd keep slipping further into her web of lies. But I knew better. I knew this game was mine to win. We were ready. The lawyer and I started preparing for the divorce. All the evidence was being compiled, processed, and documented. There would be no escape for her when the time came. When I finally made my move, it would be with everything I had. And when it was over, I'd make sure my kids were with me, and she would be left with nothing but her lies. This was only the beginning. A few days later, after I installed those cameras, I finally had what I'd been waiting for. A full-on recording of my wife, Sarah, cheating on me in our own bedroom. It wasn't some grainy, unclear footage either. It was high-quality, unmistakable evidence. There was no denying what was happening on that screen. Watching it, I felt a mix of emotions I can't even begin to describe. It wasn't just anger or betrayal. It was like a slow realization that the woman I'd built my life with was a complete stranger to me. There she was in the bed we used to share, doing things I didn't even want to picture. It was sickening, but I kept my cool. That's the thing. I never let my emotions control me. I didn't want to blow everything up in a fit of rage. Sure, part of me wanted to send the video to everyone I knew right then and there, to burn her world to the ground, but that would have been too easy. I had to wait, be patient. There's no satisfaction in immediate gratification when it comes to revenge. You have to let it simmer, let the tension build until it snaps at just the right moment. Timing is everything, and I wasn't about to ruin the perfect opportunity by acting too soon. My lawyer had been prepping everything behind the scenes. The paperwork was all in place, and we were ready to move forward the moment I gave the signal. I knew I had to strike when it would hit her hardest, when she'd feel the full weight of her choices. So I waited just a little longer. Every day felt like a countdown, and I could see it in her eyes that she had no clue what was coming. She went about her life as if everything was normal, sleeping in the same bed with me, making small talk like nothing was wrong. The audacity of it all was unbelievable. Then, when everything was perfectly set, I hit send. The video went out to all our mutual friends, every last one of them. There were no explanations, no context, just the raw footage. I didn't need to say anything. The video spoke for itself. Within minutes, my phone started blowing up. People were shocked. Some couldn't believe it. Others were disgusted. And a few of them reached out to me, expressing their sympathy. It didn't take long for the news to spread like wildfire. Her little perfect world was collapsing, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I didn't want any more attention than necessary, but I needed people to know who she really was. I needed her to feel the weight of what she'd done. The looks, the whispers, she'd become a pariah overnight. People who thought she was this loving, doting wife now knew the truth, and it shattered any illusion she'd built around herself. Once the video was out, I didn't waste any time. I went straight to her and told her, flat out, that I was filing for divorce. Her reaction was priceless. She stood there, frozen for a moment, like she couldn't believe what was happening. I'll never forget the look on her face, her eyes wide with shock, her lips parting as if she was trying to form words but couldn't. And then, when the reality hit her, she snapped. She exploded in anger, calling me every name in the book. "You're an asshole," she screamed, her voice shaking with fury. "I never loved you. Not once." I just stood there, watching her unravel. Her words didn't hurt me. Not anymore. I'd already checked out emotionally by then. I knew what she was trying to do. She wanted to lash out, to make me feel something, to get under my skin. But it didn't work. I wasn't the one losing here. I simply looked at her, calm as ever, and said, "Doesn't matter now. We'll settle this in court." That shut her up for a second. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to turn this around. But deep down, I think she already knew there was no coming back from this. The divorce was happening, and she was about to lose everything. Now, let me tell you about the court process. You might think divorce court is this somber, stressful experience, but for me, it was actually pretty damn satisfying. Walking into that courtroom, I felt like I had all the power. I was fully prepared, and my lawyer was ruthless. We went over every single detail beforehand, strategizing, making sure there were no loose ends. By the time we sat down in front of the judge, I knew exactly how this was going to play out. First off, I laid it all out there. I didn't hold back. I talked at length about her infidelity, of course, but I also brought up her mental health struggles. And I don't mean in a way that made me look like an uncaring husband. No, I framed it as concern. I told the court how I'd been worried about her for a long time, how she'd been seeing a psychologist regularly, and how her behavior had been increasingly erratic. I was careful to paint myself as the stable, caring parent, the one who was looking out for the best interests of our children. And then came the piece de resistance, the video. The same video I'd sent to our friends. I played it in court for everyone to see. The room went silent as it played. There was no denying what was on that screen. You could hear a pin drop by the time it ended. Sarah was sitting there, white as a sheet, unable to say anything. That's when she tried to flip the script. "He's a criminal," she yelled, standing up in the courtroom. "He distributed that video without my consent. He violated my privacy." Her voice was shrill, desperate, as if she thought she could somehow turn the tables and make me look like the bad guy. But I was ready for this. Calmly, I explained that I'd been hacked, that someone had stolen the video from my personal files and distributed it without my knowledge. And I had the paperwork to prove it. That same day, I had filed a police report about a fraud incident. I even had the report that detailed how someone had stolen $542 from my account. I presented it all in court, making it look like I was just as much a victim of this as she was. It worked. The judge couldn't pin the video leak on me, and Sarah looked like she was grasping at straws. I'd completely outmaneuvered her. She thought she could paint herself as the victim, but I'd played the long game, and it paid off. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. I got full custody of the kids. She could see them, but only by agreement, and only under supervision. She lost the house, the respect of her friends, and everything she thought she could rely on. As for me, I walked out of that courtroom knowing I had won. I had my kids, my life, and my dignity intact. Sarah? She had nothing but the wreckage of her own choices to deal with. And I couldn't have been more satisfied. In the end, it wasn't just about the divorce. It was about taking control of my life again. And damn, did it feel good. Things have been going pretty smoothly since the divorce. I had custody of the kids, my life was getting back on track. And for the most part, Sarah seemed to fade into the background like the bad memory she was. I figured she'd lick her wounds, maybe try to rebuild whatever life she could from the wreckage of our marriage. I even allowed myself to hope that this might finally be over. But that was wishful thinking. Turns out, she wasn't done with me yet. It all started when I got a call from my lawyer out of the blue. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, the kind of tone that immediately makes your stomach drop. "We got a situation," he said. Apparently, Sarah had filed a motion to reopen the custody case, claiming that the original proceedings were unfair. That wasn't all. She was accusing me of manipulating the court and painting her as unstable to win custody. But the kicker? She was now accusing me of emotionally abusing her and the kids during our marriage. I sat there listening to the details, trying to make sense of it. It felt like a bad dream. She was alleging that I'd used my influence over the legal process to rig the divorce. And worse, she was now fabricating stories of abuse, claiming I'd neglected the kids, that I'd been verbally abusive, that I'd manipulated them to hate her. None of it was true, of course, but the fact that she was willing to go that low, it was almost surreal. I hung up the phone, my head spinning. It wasn't about custody anymore. Not really. This was her revenge. She couldn't handle the fact that she'd lost. So now she was coming at me with everything she had left, no matter how insane or destructive. It wasn't just an attack on me. It was an attempt to drag the kids through another legal battle. And this time she was playing dirty, real dirty. I went straight into preparation mode. I met with my lawyer, and we started to lay out a defense strategy. The thing is, we already had everything we needed. All the evidence from the divorce, the recordings, the video, the police report, all of it was still intact. But now, I had to defend myself from these new claims, which meant going through every single detail of our past life together and tearing apart her lies. The weeks leading up to the hearing were tense. Sarah didn't hesitate to make her new accusations public. She started telling anyone who would listen that I had manipulated the legal system, that I was controlling, abusive, and unfit to be a father. She was painting this picture of me as the monster in her story, and to be honest, I wasn't even surprised. After everything she'd done, it was clear she'd stop at nothing to ruin me, even if it meant dragging herself down in the process. Then came the court date. Walking into that courtroom again felt different this time. The first time, I was angry, determined to win and prove her wrong. Now I was just tired. Tired of her games, tired of the lies, tired of the way she was weaponizing the system against me. But I knew I had no choice. This was another battle, and I had to fight it for my kids. She was sitting there, all smug and composed, like she actually believed her own bullshit. Her lawyer made her sound like a victim of some grand manipulation scheme, claiming I'd exploited her mental health struggles to make her look bad, that I'd orchestrated the entire case against her to alienate her from our children. She even pulled out the abuse card, saying I'd emotionally abused her for years, undermining her confidence and controlling her life. It was disgusting, but I kept my cool. When it was my turn, I laid everything out again. I went over the video evidence of her affair, the months of lies, the way she had prioritized her affair over the family. Then I addressed the allegations of abuse. I didn't just deny them. I obliterated them. I had witnesses, records, even the kids' school reports showing how much better off they'd been since I took custody. The psychological reports from her own therapist helped too. They painted her as the one struggling with control and instability, not me. Then we hit her where it hurt. I brought up the police report from the day I'd allegedly leaked the video of her affair. I showed how I had filed for fraud that very day, proving my story that someone had hacked my account and stolen money. It wasn't hard to tie that into the claim that the video had been distributed without my consent. That shut down her whole argument that I'd broken the law by sending the video. The judge listened carefully, but by the end, it was clear that Sarah had overplayed her hand. Her new accusations fell apart under scrutiny, and once again, she was left scrambling to explain herself. Her lawyer tried to spin the story, but there was nothing left to twist. When the final ruling came down, the judge saw through everything. The court upheld the original custody arrangement. Full custody to me, with limited, supervised visitation for her. There was no sympathy left for her in that courtroom. In fact, the judge even reprimanded her for wasting the court's time with unfounded accusations. It was over. Again. As I walked out of the courtroom, I didn't feel the same satisfaction I had the first time. It wasn't a victory this time, it was just survival. Sarah had tried to take everything from me again, and she'd failed. But at what cost? The damage she'd done to our kids by dragging them through this, the chaos she'd caused in their lives, there was no coming back from that. She destroyed whatever chance she had left of being a real mother to them. And me? I'd won again, but I was done playing her game. After the final court battle, life started to feel like mine again. There was a strange kind of peace that settled over the house once everything was said and done. No more court dates, no more late-night legal consultations, and no more dealing with Sarah's toxic games. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. I threw myself into work, and it paid off. Within a few months, I was promoted, something I hadn't expected. The extra money didn't hurt, but more than that, it gave me a sense of control over my life again. Things were finally starting to fall into place. The kids were doing better too. They were getting used to the new routine, spending time with me during the week and seeing their mother only during supervised visits. I made it a point to keep them busy, family game nights, trips to the park, and even cooking together. I wanted them to feel that despite all the upheaval, their home life was stable. I also started going out more, cautiously dipping my toes back into the dating scene. At first, I was hesitant. Trust doesn't come easy when you've been burned like I have, but I was taking things slow. That's when I met Lisa. She was everything Sarah wasn't. Down to earth, kind, and most importantly, she didn't play games. There was no drama, no manipulations. She was just real. We clicked immediately, but I kept my guard up, wary of rushing into anything. She was patient, never pushing me for more than I was ready to give. And over time, I started to realize that not all relationships were destined to turn toxic. Things were looking up for me, but Sarah's life? It was a different story entirely. Right after the court decision, Sarah jumped into a new relationship. I figured she'd try to move on quickly. She was always the type to need someone around to validate her, so I wasn't surprised. But the guy she hooked up with? He was bad news. Rumor had it he was as controlling as she was. It didn't take long before I started hearing stories from mutual acquaintances about their explosive arguments in public, about how he'd embarrass her in front of people, and how their relationship seemed to be spiraling out of control. It was ironic, really. For years, Sarah had controlled every aspect of our marriage, manipulating me, gaslighting me, always making me feel like I was the problem. And now, she'd found herself in the same situation. Only this time, she was on the receiving end of the toxicity. At first, I didn't care. What she did with her life wasn't my problem anymore. And honestly, I felt a certain satisfaction knowing that she was finally reaping what she'd sown. But as time went on, her chaotic relationship started impacting the kids. When she had her supervised visits, she'd talk to them about her new boyfriend, trying to present him as some great guy. The kids weren't buying it. They'd seen enough of her instability, and they knew better than to get attached to another one of her bad decisions. One day, after she'd missed yet another visit, my youngest asked me, "Dad, why doesn't Mom come to see us anymore?" I could hear the confusion and hurt in his voice, and it hit me hard. I knew Sarah's new relationship was taking priority over everything else in her life, including her children. She wasn't showing up for them, too wrapped up in her own mess to care about the damage she was doing. And the damage was starting to show. Sarah and her new boyfriend were constantly in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Public arguments, rumors of cheating on both sides, and drama that spilled out into their social circles. It became obvious that she was in over her head. The guy wasn't just bad for her. He was destroying what little she had left of her life. She tried to flaunt the relationship in my face in the beginning, as if it was some kind of victory. But now, it was clear to everyone that she had made another colossal mistake. I'd get messages from friends asking if I'd heard about her latest meltdown, or if I'd seen the latest post she put on social media, where she'd gone from over-the-top declarations of love for her boyfriend to cryptic, bitter posts about being betrayed and lied to. It was a train wreck, and she was driving it straight off the rails. Meanwhile, my life was steady. I wasn't interested in drama, and I made sure to keep my kids away from the chaos that surrounded Sarah. I focused on them, on my new relationship with Lisa, and on my work. The more I thrived, the worse Sarah seemed to spiral. Then one night I got a call from her. It was late, and I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to answer. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying, and she tried to sound casual at first, talking about how she wanted to see the kids more, how she missed them. But then it shifted. She started talking about how hard things had been for her, about how she felt trapped in her relationship with this guy, and how she didn't know where else to turn. It was almost pathetic hearing her like that. The strong, manipulative woman who had once held so much power over me was now broken, lost in her own choices. Part of me felt sorry for her, but a bigger part of me knew that this was the path she'd chosen. She was reaping what she had sown. I kept the conversation short, told her that her access to the kids was strictly through the agreed visitation rights. And that was that. When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of closure. Sarah's life was unraveling, and for once, it wasn't my problem to fix. I had my kids, my stability, and for the first time in a long time, I had my peace. As for Sarah, she was left with the mess she'd made, and from what I could tell, there was no coming back from it. The weeks after that late-night call from Sarah were strangely quiet. No more drama, no more messages, no more chaos. I'd heard through the grapevine that her relationship with the guy had finally blown up in spectacular fashion. It was inevitable. She had burned through all her chances, both with me and with anyone else. By now, she was on her own, and I couldn't help but feel relieved. My life, in contrast, was steady. The kids were doing great, thriving really. They were settled into the new normal, and I could see how much happier they were now that the constant tension and instability were gone. We had found a rhythm, a routine that worked, and they knew that they could count on me. As for me, I was finally at peace. Lisa and I had grown closer, and for the first time in years, I was in a relationship that wasn't about manipulation or control. It was about trust and understanding. We weren't rushing into anything, and I wasn't putting pressure on myself to make it perfect. It just felt right, and after everything I'd been through, that was enough. One evening, after the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, I sat down in the living room, thinking about how far I'd come. It was a strange feeling, reflecting on the wreckage that had been my marriage to Sarah. In a way, it felt like a lifetime ago, as though that person, the man who had been trapped in that toxic relationship, was someone I barely recognized. But I also knew that person was still part of me. He had been shaped by everything that had happened, for better or worse. The betrayals, the lies, the endless games, it had all left its mark. But here I was standing on the other side of it, not broken but stronger. I realized that it wasn't just about winning in court or getting custody of the kids or seeing Sarah's life fall apart. It was about reclaiming my life piece by piece. It was about learning to trust myself again, learning that I deserved better than what I had accepted for so long. It was about moving forward, not just surviving. Sarah's downfall wasn't something I celebrated anymore. I wasn't angry at her. I wasn't even bitter. In the end, I just felt sorry for her. She had made her choices, and she was paying the price. But I couldn't let her story define mine any longer. My story was about recovery, about rebuilding, about the quiet victories, the ones you don't always see but feel in the way life slowly gets better day by day. It was about being a good father, a better man, and finding happiness again on my own terms. So, where does that leave me? Honestly, it leaves me in a place I never thought I'd get to, a place of peace. I've learned that life doesn't always go the way you plan, but it's how you handle the setbacks that defines you. Sarah's betrayal could have destroyed me, but it didn't. Instead, it gave me the push I needed to take control of my life. And now, I'm looking forward to the future. Not just for me, but for my kids, for the family we've built out of the ashes of what was. The past is behind me, and I've finally found what I thought I'd lost myself. And that, more than anything, is the real victory.
My life was shaped by hard work and determination, following a straightforward path. Growing up on a small Midwest farm taught me resilience and simplicity. Despite my rural roots, I wanted more than the familiar fields and faces of my tiny hometown. That ambition led me to law school and eventually to New York City, where I was told dreams could come true if you were brave enough to chase them. What I didn't expect was that New York would also be where I experienced my first heartbreak. The shift from farm boy to aspiring lawyer in the chaotic city wasn't easy. Adjusting to Manhattan's towering buildings, crowded subways, and relentless pace left me feeling out of place. But I landed a job at a mid-tier law firm working in bankruptcy, a field as foreign to me as the city itself. Amid the professional challenges and loneliness, I found solace in my colleagues and later in a woman named Eloise. Eloise broke my heart. I wish I'd handled it better, but deep down, I'm still that farm boy. My name is Walter Stillman, an up-and-coming tax attorney. It's not exactly thrilling, but the truth is even less exciting. Fresh out of law school and pursuing a master's in taxation, I got my first and only job at a mid-sized Manhattan law firm working in the least desirable department, bankruptcy. At the start, I had a modest job and a place to live. Nothing more. But my luck changed when I began working for Eric Erickson, the firm's bankruptcy partner. He was a seasoned expert, a tough mentor who expected competence but was always willing to teach. I owe much of my success to him. Through his guidance, I found my footing in life, and with time, I even found happiness. But first, I had to face heartbreak. Our bankruptcy department was small, mostly just Mr. Erickson and me. Bankruptcy wasn't a popular field at the firm, so when we needed help, 2 part-time lawyers reluctantly pitched in. The work felt surreal, like something out of a Lewis Carroll story. Everything seemed upside down. Of all my law school classmates, only Chuck Thompson ended up in New York too. Though we weren't close in school, our shared Midwestern background brought us together in the city. Chuck, now working for the Manhattan DA, had recently married and invited me to dinner at his apartment. When I arrived, I immediately noticed Eloise Schaffer, an incredibly attractive woman with that signature New York elegance. She had a sophisticated yet effortless look, as if her beauty was just natural. I had no idea why she ended up as my dinner partner that night. Eloise, with her dark hair and green eyes, seemed way out of my league. But apparently, Carol Thompson had other ideas. The evening turned into a delightful conversation. Eloise wasn't just beautiful. She was outgoing, confident, and engaging. At the end of the night, she asked me to take her home to Brooklyn. I thought we'd take a cab, but she insisted on the subway. She stayed close, asking me questions and genuinely listening, which made the ride exhilarating. At her door, she rewarded me with a fiery kiss that left no doubt about her interest. "Can I see you again?" I asked. After some effort, we found a time for our first official date. Afterward, she gave me a second, more reserved kiss and said goodnight. I left, stunned by my luck. 5 weeks and 4 dates later, I was heartbroken. The night before, Eloise told me she had plans with another man, Rodrigo Ruiz, the state labor commissioner. Tall, handsome, and successful, he seemed like the perfect match for someone like Eloise. I must have looked miserable because Mr. Erickson called me into his office. "So, Walt, what's wiped that Midwestern smile off your face?" he asked. "Sorry, it's personal. I don't want to burden anyone." But there was no point in hiding anything from Eric. Soon enough, he had the full story. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands like he was praying, and rested his chin on his fingertips. "When I was young," Mr. Erickson began, This city was still run by the Irish and Jews. It was fascinating to watch them, third and fourth generation Americans who still spoke with accents or used Yiddish expressions. These were people who went to Fordham and Columbia but still managed to keep their ethnic flair as professionals. They're gone now, and I miss the fun they brought to politics. These days, politicians come from diverse backgrounds, which brings new perspectives to the political landscape. Or maybe they just take themselves too seriously. "Sorry, Mr. Erickson, I don't follow," I said, confused. He sighed and replied, "My wish is that you never lose that Midwestern innocence, Walter. Now about your girlfriend's guy. He was born Rodney Kaufman. His father was the heir to Kaufman's department store fortune, and his mother was Puerto Rican Jewish, Luis Ruiz. He's married to Sophie Sloan from the wealthy Sloan family. For political reasons, he uses his mother's last name and goes by the Spanish version of his first name. Roddy is a seasoned politician with a solid career built on his expertise. But your lady prefers you to him for 3 good reasons. First, the man is 47 and she's much younger. Second, he's married to a nice Jewish woman with 3 kids. While she's not overly jealous, she certainly wouldn't tolerate being replaced, especially given her wealthy and influential family. Third, Roddy himself is cautious about his personal relationships because of the potential impact on his political career. But what if she is seeing him? I asked, feeling uneasy. Mr. Erickson frowned the way he did when someone asked a dumb question. "How old is this lady?" 29, I replied. "A 29-year-old woman with a ticking biological clock? And you're a suitable 26-year-old lawyer," he said, his tone sharp. "I think you're misjudging the situation. Roddy Boy's involvement is meant to push you forward. 4 dates with a 29-year-old single woman means things are getting serious, so either get serious or get lost." After that talk with my boss, I felt better, even encouraged. On our next date, I pushed the issue and was rewarded with a warm response. "If we're going to move forward, I need to know you're serious about this," she said, her voice firm. "I could ask the same of you," I replied. "Are you speaking generally?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Yes," I confirmed. "And about Roddy?" she pressed. "I've been seeing him for a few years," she admitted, "but he's not serious." "And I am serious," I said, thinking again how smart Erickson was. She took me to bed that night. I wasn't made, but I didn't have much experience. She had plenty and used all of it. I barely survived the night. I ended up moving into her apartment for a week, and soon enough, marriage was on the table. She began dropping hints as soon as I moved in. Eloise was 29 and working as an associate manager at Sanderson Financial Management. Shortly after our engagement, she became a vice president. I knew she was smart and careful, but I was surprised by how organized she was. It took just 6 weeks to plan the wedding. Family-wise, she was the oldest of 3 and the only daughter. Her father, a real estate lawyer, worked in Westchester and Putnam counties and was heavily involved in politics. That's why they rushed to plan a large wedding. Death had reduced my family to just me and my sister Nancy, who lived on the West Coast with her partner. She refused my invitation to the wedding. My career had settled into a comfortable routine, now doing less demanding work without Eric's guidance. He made it clear he was preparing me for the future. Bankruptcy was stagnant, and Eric didn't hide the fact that I needed to be ready for when things picked up, as he was planning to retire. "You have everything: intelligence, a likable personality. But you need to learn how to really work," he said, looking at me intently. In response, I focused on studying the laws and cases carefully. "Yes," he acknowledged, "but there are still some techniques that aren't written down yet." On the Friday before the wedding, I learned a new trick. Eloise and her mother had picked Labor Day for the wedding. I hadn't quite understood that this early date meant we'd have the weekend to get ready, and we could fly to the Caribbean for our honeymoon, courtesy of her parents, the Tuesday after the wedding. Our bags were packed and waiting in the hallway, 3 for Eloise and 1 for me. I was nervous about the wedding, but I didn't have time to dwell on it that morning. The week before, my fiancée had gone to her family's home in Westchester, so we could have some time apart before the big day. "This will make the honeymoon sweeter and keep my wedding jitters from scaring you off," she joked. At 10 a.m. on that Friday, the last business day of August and 3 days before the wedding, I had a bankruptcy court hearing. It was for setting up the first day orders, a critical step in reorganization cases to establish the rules for how the debtor would proceed under court protection. For a small case like mine, these hearings were informal, with just a couple of lawyers and the judge. Usually, it was the bank's lawyer and the debtor's lawyer. Judge Marks, like me, stuck to the rules. That Friday, I walked into my office ready to grab the case file and head to court, but the clerk told me the judge's secretary had scheduled a phone hearing instead. When I arrived, I was immediately nervous. The judge's clerk connected everyone, and Judge Marks asked, "So, Amanda, what's your issue with this ruling?" Amanda was the bank's lawyer. She was sharp and knew the law well. Her arguments were direct and hit all the weak spots in my case. Amanda was a talented lawyer, but not particularly attractive. Her nickname was Sugar, though it made no sense. She was short, under 5 feet, and heavyset, especially below the waist, though I always thought she had a nice face. After Amanda finished, I tried to speak, but the judge cut me off. "The order is issued. My secretary will fax it to all parties," he said. Once the call ended, I asked Amanda what had just happened. She laughed and said, "Judge Marks got tickets from my firm for the last days of the Saratoga races. He needs to be north of Albany by 1 p.m. He couldn't waste time talking to us today. So for appearances, he ruled against me in a case that doesn't matter. But next time I'll get you," she said, still laughing. "It's not how I like to win," I complained. "Take what you can get," she replied, then added, "You know, my aunts say you're a pretty good guy for a goy." She laughed again and ended the call. Around this time, Eric came in and told me to take the rest of the day off and relax before the wedding. As I left, I couldn't help but ask, "Who are the goyim?" He smiled. "That's us, non-Jews. And what they meant was that you're a good young man for a guy like you. It's a compliment." I headed back to the apartment, thinking I could leave for Westchester early. I wasn't supposed to arrive until the next day with the rehearsal dinner set for Saturday evening. But why sit around in the city? I expected to be tied up all day working on the case, writing and rewriting the order to satisfy everyone involved. But that didn't happen. So why not get a head start? I tried calling Eloise first, but her phone went to voicemail. That's when I made the fateful decision. I called her parents' house in Westchester hoping to leave a message. It was one of those moments where a random occurrence changes everything. None of the Schaffer family was home. Their regular maid, Rosita, was off getting fitted for her dress for the wedding. Her cousin was filling in, a woman with limited English whom I had never met. She didn't recognize my name. "I'd like to leave a message for Miss Eloise. This is Walter," I repeated for the 3rd time. "She's not here. She's in the city," the cousin replied. "I know she lives in the city, but she came home for the wedding. This is Walter. I'll come by later today." "She's in the city, staying at a hotel. Come to the wedding tomorrow," said Rosita's cousin. It took a moment, but my curiosity was sparked. "Which hotel?" I asked. "Plaza," came the reply. I'm not usually a suspicious person, but who wouldn't hesitate after that conversation? It was nearly noon when I finally called the Plaza Hotel. Our reception was supposed to be in Westchester, not at the famous Plaza in New York City. Something was happening that I hadn't been told about. There had been a bachelorette party last week, but maybe the ladies had decided to have another celebration before the wedding. I called the hotel and asked for Eloise Schaffer. There was no record of her under that name. Then, perhaps out of insecurity, I asked, "What about Rodrigo Ruiz?" "No, sorry," replied the young woman. "Try Rodney Kaufman." After a pause, she said, "Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Rodney Kaufman are staying in the honeymoon suite. Would you like to be connected?" It could still be someone else, I told myself, thinking it wasn't an uncommon name as the phone rang. When a man answered, I almost hung up. But I had to ask, "Can I speak with Eloise Schaffer, please?" "Elle, it's for you," I heard him say. "Hello?" she said. I recognized her voice but couldn't bring myself to speak. "Hello? Is anyone there?" she asked, and then to him, "There's no one on the line." Finally, I found my voice. "It's Walter. Don't come to the wedding. I won't be there." I hung up as I heard her scream my name before the call cut off. I don't remember much after that. I sat in the apartment paralyzed, as if all the energy had drained from my body. It felt like everything good in my life was gone. The romance, living together, our stylish apartment, it had all been a lie. The apartment wasn't even mine. The lease was in her name. My mind shut down. I knew I needed to get up, grab my suitcase and leave, but I couldn't move. Then the apartment door opened. It was her. I vaguely wondered how she'd arrived so quickly. I looked at my watch. 2 p.m. The judge should have been at the races by now. Funny how that fact stood out to me. "Walter, we need to talk," she said, her voice uneasy. "Have you been with him all week?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She stood in the living room, avoiding eye contact. "We just said goodbye," she replied quietly. So it didn't end before now, I pressed. Walter, stop it. You know I love you, she insisted, frustration creeping into her tone. How do I know that? I challenged. I'll never see him again. We've broken up, she said, her voice firm. Why? I demanded. She hesitated. I've been with him for 7 years, almost since the day I moved to the city. No, why end it now? I asked again, the question hanging in the air. Because I'm marrying you on Monday, she said softly. No, you're not, I replied coldly. Walter, be reasonable. Everything's arranged. Over 300 guests are coming, she pleaded. I didn't respond. There was no point. I stood up, walked past her, my mind made up. Where are you going? We need to work this out, she cried, her voice breaking. I grabbed my suitcase and left. She followed me, shouting for me to stop, but eventually she gave up. I wandered aimlessly for hours, vaguely aware I was heading toward the bridge. As night fell, I was exhausted. I crossed Court Street near City Hall and found a small bar. It was packed for a Friday night, but I found a dark corner to hide in. Hey, a voice said. I looked up to see Sugar Moskowitz with a drink in each hand. She set one in front of me. You looked like you could use this, she said. Thanks, I mumbled, taking a sip of the strong drink. It's called a stinger, she explained, then added. As you can see, I'm not very religious. Religious? I asked, confused. She smiled, a beautiful smile, and explained it was a joke about being in a bar on a Friday night with non-Jews. And what's with the suitcase? What should I tell my mother? She teased. I looked down and suddenly remembered the suitcase by my side. Oh, I had to leave. After all, the apartment is hers, I said, taking another sip that burned all the way down. Sugar, Amanda, didn't ask too many questions. Instead, she told funny stories about herself and people we both knew from bankruptcy court. It's a small legal niche and everyone knows each other. She kept my glass full and tried to make me laugh. I think she already knew I was engaged and getting married soon, but she didn't seem surprised to find me in a Brooklyn bar with a suitcase the night before my wedding. Maybe she'd had a few drinks before I arrived and hadn't realized what the suitcase meant or where I was at that moment. The only clear memory I have of the night was Amanda helping me into a car and saying, "It's not far to go." Later, I dreamt of Eloise. In the dream, she pinned me to the bed, enjoying herself much more than usual. I urgently needed to use the bathroom, but when I got out of bed, I realized I had no idea where I was. The apartment had changed. For a moment, I was completely disoriented. Then it hit me with sharp, painful clarity. I'd left Eloise in her apartment. But where was I now? My head throbbed, and my brain felt stuffed with cotton. I could hardly remember the night before. I remembered going into the bar on Court Street. Then, a friend had joined me. For a moment, I couldn't recall who it was. And then it came back. Amanda? Sugar? What had she been doing there? And why was I here, unclothed in an unfamiliar bed? I was in a small room, just large enough for a double bed. There was no other furniture. The bed was up against a window that stretched from the middle of the wall to the ceiling. I was alone, but there were signs someone else had slept there too. There wasn't even a closet, and my clothes were nowhere in sight. It felt like the room was an oversized closet that just happened to have a bed in it. But there was a door, even though it couldn't open fully because the bed blocked it. I looked out and saw a larger room. One side had a window, and I could see the sidewalk outside. I was in what's known around here as an English basement, a floor partly below ground, with windows starting just below sidewalk level. The space had been converted into a small apartment, or, as I later learned, 2 apartments, the one I was in, and a smaller one at the back. The main room was divided by a counter into a kitchen and dining area. The bay window section functioned as a living room, with 2 small chairs and a window seat. Seeing no one around, I crawled out in search of the bathroom and my clothes. There was a door at the far side of the room, and just as I got there, it opened. Amanda stepped out, wearing a robe and drying her wet hair with a towel. "Oh, you're up," she said, noticing me just in time. "It must be nearly noon." I instinctively covered my groin with my hands, which made her giggle. "It's too late for modesty," she teased. "I saw everything last night." Embarrassed, I rushed past her, guessing that the room she'd come from was the bathroom. I was right, and after closing the door behind me, I relieved myself. The bathroom was small, just a shower stall and no bathtub, so I decided to take a quick shower before figuring out what had happened to my clothes and suitcase. The shower was cramped, but the hot water felt great on my hungover body. Feeling refreshed, I looked around for a towel but couldn't find one. Still wet and unclothed, I had no choice but to confront Amanda. I opened the bathroom door and stepped out, only to realize we weren't alone. A young, dark-haired woman was sitting at the table, grinning widely at me. Amanda was in the small kitchen area, busy with cups and a coffee pot. "How do you take your coffee?" Amanda asked, completely casual, as if I wasn't standing there unclothed. I jumped back behind the bathroom door and called out, "Can I get some clothes or at least a towel?" Both women burst into laughter. Amanda paused long enough to say, "The towels are in the closet, along with your suitcase and the clothes you tore off last night." Peeking out from behind the door, I asked, "Where's the closet?" Still laughing, Amanda pointed the coffee pot at a set of barred doors near the back of the room, behind the desk and in front of what must have been the apartment's main door. "I'd bring them to you, but as you can see, I'm busy," Amanda said. The other woman didn't move either, so I had no choice but to run to the closet. When I opened the doors, I found my clothes neatly hung inside. My suit and shirt were hanging up, and my underwear was resting on top of my suitcase. I quickly grabbed my underwear and pulled it on, followed by my shirt, all the while hearing the women giggling behind me. "Walter, by the way, this is my sister Sonia," Amanda said. "Hello, Mr. Stillman," Sonia greeted me. "Hi," I replied as I opened my suitcase to grab my jeans. "You don't need to get dressed on my account," Sonia said. "I may be the younger sister, but I'm already married with 3 kids. Unclothed men don't shock me." Both women laughed as I pulled on my jeans. "Come have some coffee," Amanda invited. Sonia brought Bailey's. "In a minute," I said, still dressing. "You didn't mention he was so shy," Sonia whispered loudly to Amanda. "I didn't know," Amanda replied, also in a loud whisper. "We barely know each other." "You're a free woman, Amanda," Sonia giggled. Once I was dressed, I sat down at the small table, craving coffee. "I like mine black, no sugar," I said. Sonia giggled again and whispered to her sister, "I think he got his sugar last night." They both burst out laughing. My head was pounding, but Amanda handed me a cup of strong coffee. Just as I was about to take a sip, Sonia's phone rang. She pulled it from a large leather bag on the floor. "Oh, hi," Sonia said into the phone. She paused, then whispered, "Aunt Hester, of course I remembered. I'm with Amanda, but she has company, and I haven't mentioned it yet." There was a longer pause, and Sonia grinned. "No, it's a man," she said, looking over at Amanda, who was gesturing for her to stop. Sonia continued, "Yes, he's handsome, but a bit shy. No, he's not Jewish. I'm sure. Trust me, I got a good look when he came out of the shower." Sonia was laughing so hard she could barely speak. "She wants to talk to you," Sonia said, handing the phone to Amanda. "Hello, Aunt," Amanda said into the phone. "No, I won't forget Daddy's birthday. Tomorrow at 6, then dinner at 7, got it?" "Oh, he's just a friend." There was a pause while Hester apparently spoke. "It won't work. He's just a friend from work. I'm sure he'll feel out of place at a family event." Amanda handed the phone back to Sonia, who listened as her aunt continued. "I don't know," Sonia said, turning to me. "She wants to know your name. What should I tell her?" "Walter," I answered. "Walter Stillman." "Walter. And I'm pretty sure they slept together last night," Sonia added. "Amanda!" Amanda yelled, but Sonia calmly replied, "Aunt Sophie's on the line now, and they want to meet him." "No, oh sweetheart, no," Amanda screamed in protest. Then Sonia handed the phone to me, saying, "My Aunt Sophie wants to speak with you." I took the phone and put it to my ear. "Hello, Walter. I'm Amanda's Aunt Sophie, and my sister Hester and I are hosting a party for our brother Leonard's birthday. Amanda and Sonia's father. We'd love for you to join us with Amanda. Could you do that? It would mean a lot to the family." "I'm not sure. I don't want to intrude," I said, trying to politely decline. "I'll leave it up to Amanda." I handed the phone back to Amanda, who spent the next 10 minutes arguing with her aunts while Sonia grinned mischievously. Both aunts took turns debating with their niece until Amanda finally gave in. "Fine, I'll bring him," Amanda sighed before hanging up. "Sugar, sugar, sugar," she muttered. "She does that, you know," Sonia said. "Does what?" I asked, confused. "Replaces curse words with sugar as if we don't know what she really means." Sonia smiled, standing up. "Well, my work here is done. Time to go rescue my husband before the kids drive him nuts." Once Sonia left, Amanda turned to me. "You don't have to go. My family can be a bit much sometimes." "I don't get why your aunts want to meet a stranger at a family gathering," I said, confused. Amanda let out a short, almost sad laugh. "Sonia's my younger sister by nearly 4 years. She's already married with 3 kids. I turned 30 last year, and my whole family thinks I should be married and pregnant by now. They act like my biological clock is ticking on their schedule, but they don't really know me. And apparently I'm also the wrong religion. She gave a wry smile and added, but at least I'm the right gender. Amanda continued, I used to have a roommate here to help with the rent. $3,500 a month. You know, junior bankruptcy lawyers don't make much. I nodded, fully aware of the low salaries in our field. Then something clicked. There's only one bed, I said, thinking aloud. Was your roommate a woman? Yes, Amanda replied, catching on to my question. But don't jump to conclusions. I'm not completely straight, but for me to have sex with a woman, I need to be a little drunk. Jessie, my former roommate, felt differently. She wanted a relationship I couldn't give her. So here I am, mostly straight, a Jewish spinster. I processed what she said as I munched on a Bailey, a flat roll with a dented center, often topped with onion flakes, like a bagel, but not quite. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me since last night. Did we? Amanda burst into laughter. Yes, we slept together. Although I wasn't thrilled when you called me Eloise. Sorry, I mumbled, feeling my face flush. Don't be a prude, we were both a little drunk, she said, grinning. Was I asked, embarrassed. You were very drunk, she confirmed with a smirk. I sat silently, sipping my coffee, trying to make sense of how my life had taken such a strange turn. Just yesterday morning, I had been pursuing a case against the woman now sitting across from me, Amanda, affectionately known as Sugar. Yesterday, I had been looking forward to marrying Eloise. Now I had lost Eloise and was discussing last night's events with Amanda. This is too much, I muttered. What is? All of it, I said. Eloise, and the fact that I'm here with you? Amanda didn't laugh, though it seemed like she wanted to. Look, you've had a rough time with Eloise. How about staying here and taking it easy today? I thought for a moment. I don't think I can handle being alone right now. If you don't mind, I'll stay. She smiled. Sure, we'll make the most of my hetero. And so we did. We went back to bed. Sex with Amanda was different from what I'd had with Eloise. Amanda was so enthusiastic it surprised me. Wow, you really enjoy this, I said. It's been a long time since I've been with a guy, she muttered. But not with women? I asked, curious. She propped herself up on her elbows, looked at me, and replied, I've slept with a lot more women than men, if that's what you're asking. But it's not about the sex. I lay next to her, slightly further down the bed. In one swift move, she was on top of me. She looked me in the eyes and said, In my opinion, nothing compares to a man in bed. But in a relationship, I need more than just sex. I need someone I can connect with. More importantly, I need someone I can respect. Do I fit that description? You're a very respectful partner in bed. It's clear your fiancé worked hard on improving your skills. I didn't know how to respond to that, but I couldn't deny the truth. Eloise had certainly trained me well in that area. Amanda continued, You're here in my bed because you're a good person. I've been watching you. You never hurt anyone if you can help it. You're honest and treat women like people, not objects. You're one of the good guys and there aren't many left. I replied. That's nice to hear, but does this really apply to a novice lawyer? It sounds like you've been keeping an eye on me. Keeping an eye on you? Of course. I saw you on Court Street and followed you to the bar, didn't I? If Miss Eloise Schaffer lost track of her prize, I wasn't about to miss out. I'm not a prize, I said firmly. Are you saying she was in love with you? She asked. No, probably not, I said, feeling the weight of the situation hit me. Sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to offend you. With that, she slid down my body, and we were once again swept up in passion. Later, we ordered takeout for dinner, and after eating, we fell into a deep sleep. In the morning, Amanda's aunts called to remind her about the upcoming party, asking if she could come early to help with preparations. Mandy, don't forget to bring Walter. Sonia told us all about him, and everyone's eager to meet him, Aunt Hester said over the phone. I don't know what Sonia told you, but he's not my boyfriend, Amanda replied. Well, bring him anyway. He knows he's invited. If he comes, Amanda said before hanging up. I grinned. As far as I can tell, they're expecting me. You don't have to go, she said, looking at me seriously. What else would I do? I don't want to be alone right now, I admitted. Amanda had distracted me from the chaos in my personal life, and I wasn't eager to sit around thinking about what Eloise had done. Okay, she agreed, but be prepared. You'll be scrutinized and treated as a potential suitor. Well, technically, I am a groom. But let's keep my personal issues a secret, if you don't mind, I said with a small smile. Fine by me. As far as today's concerned, that witch Eloise doesn't exist. But soon you'll have to deal with her, Amanda warned. I know, I sighed. Amanda reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Walter, you've got to make a decision. Either go through with this wedding or end it tomorrow. Either way, it's going to be messy. I can't go through with it now, I said, feeling overwhelmed. Don't be too hasty. If you call it off, there will be serious consequences for your career and life. This won't blow over quietly. Why? I'm not going to explain the real reason, and I doubt she will, I argued, feeling a little defensive. Oh, my sweet, naive friend, she said, squeezing my hand gently. Do you really think people don't know about Commissioner Ruiz and Eloise Schaffer? They've been together for quite a while. I thought they broke up, I said, surprised. Amanda didn't laugh, but her knowing smile said everything. I played along, but Eloise dated Ruiz the entire time she was with you. But why? I asked. If she wanted to stay with him, why involve me? He's planning to run for governor next year, Amanda said. Your engagement to Eloise was supposed to end the affair, and you were the perfect solution. A young, decent, professional, straight guy. The kind of man every straight woman in New York is looking for. A straight woman? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, someone who identifies with the gender they were born with, like Eloise. She needed a partner to quiet the rumors about her affair with an older married politician. She played you like a fiddle, as you New Yorkers like to say. I frowned. Oh, don't feel sorry for yourself. Maybe she was just saying goodbye like she claimed a week before your wedding. Would you have preferred she did it after? I'd prefer if she didn't do it at all. In fact, I insist, I said firmly. Amanda gave a small shrug. Well, you got your revenge with me. You could still head to Westchester and marry her. That's not happening, I replied sharply. Hey, pull yourself together before you do anything drastic, she warned. If you don't show up at the church tomorrow, people will ask questions. Let them, I said, not caring about the consequences. Amanda leaned in, her tone serious. Okay, listen. A scandal won't help anyone. You're a junior lawyer in the bankruptcy department, and Commissioner Ruiz is a big deal. You make waves and his boat might rock, but yours will sink. Are you saying I'll lose my job? I asked, suddenly more concerned. No, Amanda said with a grim look. I'm saying you'll lose your career. No one will hire you. I paused to consider, then said, Amanda, I may just be a simple guy from Iowa, but when Eloise accepted my proposal, she made a commitment. She didn't keep hers, so you can't expect me to keep mine. Amanda shook her head. Finally, she said, Come on, you stubborn corn farmer, get dressed. I'm taking you to meet my family. It's not every day they get to meet a real live Presbyterian. Actually, my family's Lutheran. Same thing, she said with a wink. At 5 p.m, we took a yellow taxi to Amanda's family home on Beverly Road. Car services were off limits because Uncle Morty was a retired taxi driver. Morty now lived on his welfare with his 2 sisters, Hester and Sophie, in the house they had inherited from their parents. Morty had been married, but his wife ran off with a shoe salesman 30 years ago, a subject that was never discussed. Aunt Sophie's husband died in Vietnam, and Hester never married. Amanda's father, Leonard, the youngest of the siblings, was the only one with children. Leonard and his wife, Rebecca, had 2 daughters, Amanda and Sonia, and now 3 grandchildren, thanks to Sonia and her husband, Jerry. The house was located in a section of Flatbush, Brooklyn, known to realtors as Ditmas or Ditmas Park. When we arrived at the large 2-story house on a spacious lot, bigger than what you usually find in the city, I didn't see anything resembling a park. Unlike Amanda's apartment, which was across from a small, quiet park, her aunts and uncle lived on a bustling avenue. The house, built in the Queen Anne style, wasn't a mansion, but was larger than the typical New York City home. We were greeted at the door by Aunt Hester, a short, sturdy woman with steel gray hair. She hugged Amanda first, calling her Mandy, before turning to me, scrutinizing me for what felt like a long time, and finally saying, Not bad at all. Handsome young man. Oh, I think he's very handsome, added Aunt Sophie, emerging from deeper within the house. Sophie was tall and dark-haired, a sharp contrast to her sister. After Sophie hugged Amanda, the aunts led us into the kitchen, where dinner was being prepared. A large cake sat on the table, and the kitchen was filled with the aroma of roasting meats and the sweet scent of vanilla. Will you peel the potatoes, Mandy? Sophie asked, handing Amanda a potato peeler and a colander of freshly washed potatoes. "I'll take your man to help set the table," Hester said, grabbing my hand and guiding me through the swinging door into the wood-paneled dining room. The dining room was a long, wide rectangle with a burgundy carpet covering the parquet floor. Dark oak panels stretched halfway up the walls, above which wallpaper adorned with roses drew the eye upward. The ceiling was an intricate design of mahogany and oak, and a modest chandelier hung from a carved mahogany medallion. Hester led me to the china cabinets along the far wall, which were filled with various sets of porcelain. She pointed to a cabinet and said, "We'll use these plates today." Smiling at me, she added, "It's not easy being Jewish, with all these different sets of dishes." I vaguely understood that there were separate sets for meat and dairy. She handed me a stack of plates, and we began setting the massive table, which had clawed legs and was covered with a pristine white linen tablecloth. As we worked, I couldn't help but inspect the bottoms of the plates and the labels on the linens. The porcelain was from England, and the linens were from Ireland. The real deal, I thought, just like the people who lived here. While Hester set the table, she engaged me in casual conversation, asking questions that seemed harmless, but were probably intended to get to know me better. Before long, she knew almost everything about me, except, of course, the details of my failed engagement. When we placed the last silver fork on the table, she remarked casually, "It doesn't hurt much, just a tiny piece. Most kids don't even cry." I didn't understand what she meant, but before I could ask, we heard commotion in the hallway. A strong female voice called out, "I'm here and I brought the birthday boy." It was Rebecca, also known as Judge Levin of the U.S. District Court, Amanda's mother. Her father, Leonard, was a professor of economics at New York University. I had been invited to Leonard's birthday party. Hester nudged me into the kitchen while she went to greet her brother and sister-in-law. Inside the kitchen, Amanda was peeling potatoes and putting them into a pot on the stove. She glanced over at me and said, "We need to wait here while my aunts break the news that you're here as their guest." "Am I going to cause you any problems?" I asked, suddenly feeling protective. "No, but it might be a bit of a shock. I've never brought a man home before. Mom can be a little critical, so be ready." The situation was awkward and only grew more uncomfortable when we were called into the living room to meet Amanda's parents. The living room was spacious and cozy, furnished in a style reminiscent of the early 20th century. It had the potential to feel peaceful, but I could sense tension building. As we entered, Amanda pulled a small box from the light jacket she had hung in the hallway earlier. It was clearly wrapped as a birthday present. There was an awkward silence when we walked in. Amanda's father, Leonard, broke the tension with a smile and a joke. "Is this young man my birthday present, Mandy?" he asked. "No, Dad," Amanda replied softly. "I brought you this." She handed him the gift, still gripping my hand tightly, which I now realized she had been doing for some time. "Well," her father said, "I was hoping for a son-in-law, but I'm sure I'll like this too." He smiled at his daughter as he unwrapped the gift, revealing a well-worn baseball. His smile widened, though the others seemed confused. Leonard explained, "This is a game ball signed by the Mets." He stood up to hug Amanda, whispering in her ear, "Still, I'd prefer a son-in-law." Amanda whispered something back, but I couldn't hear. Her father chuckled, but when I glanced at her mother, she was glaring at me. At that moment, Sonia arrived with her husband and 3 children, who quickly stole the spotlight as they rushed into the living room. "Oh, good, you made it," Sonia said, giving me a brief hug before introducing me to her husband, Jerry, a tall, skinny guy who looked like he could be knocked over by a strong breeze. "This is Amanda's new love," Sonia added, grinning. "At least she got the gender right this time." Jerry shook my hand, adding, "Don't mind Sonia, she just loves teasing her older sister." Soon the conversation shifted to the kids' latest antics and the gifts they'd brought for their grandfather. It was a relief to be out of the spotlight, though I could still feel Amanda's mother watching me. Dinner was simple but delicious, and the conversations around the table were filled with the quiet joy that comes from family being together. Occasionally I was asked a question, but if Amanda could answer for me, she did so immediately. For more personal questions, I answered simply or deflected. Yes, my parents were dead. Yes, the farm was in Iowa. Yes, I only had one sister. I avoided talking about her because I didn't know how to explain that part of my life. However, during coffee and birthday cake, things took a turn. Judge Levin, Amanda's mother, had been watching me closely, and when the children were occupied with their cake, she pounced. "Walter, are you related to the Stillman who's supposed to marry Eloise Schaffer tomorrow?" I hesitated, but spoke before Amanda could jump in with the sharp response I anticipated. "Yes and no," I said. "I was supposed to marry Eloise, but it's over. And before you ask, your daughter had nothing to do with it." "Is that true?" Amanda's mother asked, turning to her daughter. "Yes," Amanda answered. "Really?" Amanda's mother pressed. "Yes, it's true if that's what you're concerned about," Amanda replied, her hostility evident. "Honestly, I didn't want to bring Walter here, but he was invited, and he was kind enough to come." I could tell her mother wanted to say more, but Leonard interrupted, silencing his wife. "Rebecca, enough," he said. Clearly, the young man found out about Mr. Kaufman. I've been observing Walter all evening, and he doesn't seem like the type to tolerate that. His words seemed to hit like a splash of cold water, leaving the judge speechless. As he glanced around the table, it was clear that while Amanda's parents understood the situation, the rest of the family did not. Amanda spoke up. "I've admired Walter from a distance for some time. When I found him that night, hurt and alone, I took the chance to get to know him. He was wronged by an awful woman. Yes, Mom, I love him. He's too good not to love." With that, Amanda walked around the table and hugged me from behind. "Good job, my niece," Uncle Morty chimed in, bringing the conversation about Amanda and me to a close. I don't remember much after that, except that there was a general sense of contentment at the table. As we left in the yellow taxi, I turned to Amanda. "Are you serious?" I asked. "What?" she replied, trying to avoid the question. "When you said you loved me, were you serious?" The taxi seemed to grow quiet. Amanda slowly raised her head and said, "Yes, I love you. When I first saw you months ago, I wanted you. But now it's more than just attraction. I love you, Walter Stillman." 30 minutes later, I was arrested. Eloise had apparently stayed in our apartment all Friday evening, waiting for me to come back. Where did she think I could have gone? But when I hadn't returned by the next morning, she grew desperate. With the wedding set for Monday, she panicked, fearing I wouldn't show. In her distress, she called the one person she thought had more to lose than she did, Rodrigo Ruiz, or as I now knew him, Rodney Kaufman. He immediately launched a police search. It took them a day to interview all the bartenders on Court Street, eventually learning I had left the Shadow Lady bar with a short brunette. Since Amanda and I had taken a taxi 12 blocks to her Cobble Hill apartment, the police started questioning all the cab drivers in the area that night. By late Sunday, they tracked down the taxi that had dropped us at the corner of Clinton and Congress. From there, they identified the basement apartment belonging to Amanda Moskowitz, the woman who fit the description of my companion. When the police visited Amanda's apartment on Friday night, they found it dark and empty. Undeterred, they posted a couple of patrol cars to wait for our return. That eager group of officers was waiting when Amanda and I finally got back. Despite Amanda's protests, they quickly took me away. At midnight, I found myself in a small, grim room badly in need of cleaning and a fresh coat of paint. They sat me down at a table and cuffed me. No one told me what I'd been accused of. After a few minutes, the door opened, and in walked Eloise, looking as beautiful as ever. "So, this is your doing?" I asked, my voice filled with anger and disappointment. She looked a bit dazed, standing across the table. There were 2 chairs on her side, but she didn't sit. "Walter, please understand, when you didn't come home, I was worried something had happened to you." "So, you had me arrested? For what?" "You're not under arrest," said a tall, very handsome man who entered quietly behind her. He moved toward Eloise, and I instantly recognized him, Rodney Kaufman, or Rodrigo Ruiz. He was more than 20 years older than me, and while he did his best to hide it, the signs of aging were there. "Rodrigo Ruiz," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "Please, call me Rod," he replied smoothly. "I hope we can be friends." "For you, it's still Mr. Stillman," I responded coldly. "And I have no desire to be friends." Rod sighed. "That's unfortunate because I think you could benefit from my friendship right now." I lifted my handcuffed wrists slightly, causing the chains to rattle. "You can keep me here, but not for long," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Rod smiled faintly. "I only hope it's long enough for you to hear what Eloise has to say." Eloise, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Walter, you've misunderstood. Rod and I are just friends now. Whatever we had is over. If you'd stayed on Friday night, I would have told you everything. We have a saying in Iowa. I may have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. I found you in his hotel room." Eloise started, but Rod interrupted her smoothly. "Regardless, the 2 of you are set to be married today, and it's in everyone's best interest to proceed with it. Sorry, but I refuse to marry this traitor," I said. Eloise let out a small cry, but Rod just smiled and said, Language, let's keep things civil." Would you rather I call her a promiscuous? Because that's what she is. I could tell my words stung him, though he kept smiling. Eloise turned away, tears streaming down her face. Rod remained calm. Such an attitude will only lead to trouble. You're being foolish. Eloise is a wonderful woman who would make an excellent wife. If you don't go through with the wedding, there will be a major scandal. Reporters are expected. This is a high-profile event. Eloise's reputation will be destroyed, and mine as well, because the truth will get out. People love gossip, and this would be perfect for them. You have a promising career ahead of you at a prestigious firm. But if you don't marry Eloise today, that career will vanish. No one will hire you after this, he warned. I smiled back. I wouldn't marry her for a senior partner position, let alone stay on as a junior lawyer in bankruptcy. Rod sighed again. I told you he wouldn't listen, Eloise muttered through her tears. Rod continued in a smooth, measured tone. Okay, Mr. Stillman, how much will it take to make Eloise Mrs. Stillman? You don't have enough money, I replied. Rod didn't blink. It doesn't have to be forever. A year or two, then a quiet divorce. And what will people say when we divorce? I asked. He stayed calm, clearly a seasoned negotiator. The situation at the time of the divorce will be my problem. Name your price for marrying her for 2 years. How long has she been pregnant? I asked, finally piecing it all together. Eloise turned toward me, her voice cold and bitter. The child could be yours. Maybe, I said. But I'll wait for the DNA test. Rodney remained unfazed. How much? No amount in the world, I said, nearly spitting the words at him. Our conversation was interrupted by a short, bald man in his 60s, followed by 2 officers. Hello, Rod, Miss Schaffer. You must be Walter Stillman, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. I'm your lawyer, Cy Lebowitz. Here's a copy of the writ of habeas corpus I just filed, he added, handing a paper to Rod. You're a bit late, Cy, Rod said, his tone slightly irritated. Things were moving slowly, Cy replied calmly. Rod tried to regain control, threatening to seek a forced commitment, but Cy dismissed the threat, pointing out the warrant was invalid since it wasn't filed by my sister, my only living relative. Realizing he had lost, Rod backed off with a shrug. Cy then took me out, where Amanda was waiting. Her mother, the judge, had woken Cy and arranged my release. That was the last time I saw Eloise. The child was never born, likely because Eloise chose to avoid a scandal that would hurt Rod. As for his threat to ruin my career, I'm sure he tried, but fate intervened. I was on my honeymoon from September 2nd to the 14th, 2008. By the time I returned on September 15th, Lehman Brothers had collapsed, turning the financial world upside down. Eric Erickson became the most important partner at the firm, and I became the go-to lawyer. Amanda and I worked 90-hour weeks for 6 months before we married, just in time, as her pregnancy was already showing. Our first child was a girl, followed by 3 more. 4 daughters turned out to be enough for us. Amanda became a judge, like her mother, and I started my own firm. When people ask the secret to my successful career and marriage, I tell them it all started with a day as a racetrack judge, a broken heart, and a girl named Sugar.